as well.
Oh, completely forgot to count myself. Just to welcome everyone to today's meeting, and today we have 3 oral briefings. We have an oral briefing from the Public Service Ombudsman on patient safety, and the department will also provide briefings on addiction services and the Westminster Tobacco and Vapes Bill. Members we will also be considering an SL1 on the bread and flour amendment regulations. And just to note that we were also due to be briefed today on the outcome of the consultation and next steps in relation to the Public Health Bill. The Department has advised that due to the extended deadline for the consultation and the high number of responses received, which is over 8,000, that they are not in a position to brief the committee on the next steps, and further work is required to analyse the responses received. So that will be rescheduled for a later date. The meeting is now open to the public.
Yeah.
Oh.
There's a spider on the desk. Sorry, that was an overreaction to it. Sorry.
Okay. So, just to remind members, committee meeting will be recorded and broadcast through Parliament buildings and online. And to remind those members and those in the public gallery that they're welcome to use mobile devices as long as they're in airplane mode, and all devices must be muted. You can connect to the Assembly Wi-Fi. Password details are available in the gallery rules, and it's not permitted to take photographs or record any of the meeting. I have no apologies at the minute. We have Linda Dillon joining by video conference. Are members aware of any other apologies? No, so maybe Diane and Nuala and Alan will be joining at a wee bit later. I move to item number 2, Chairperson's Business. If I could refer members to the debate on duty of candour on Monday in the Assembly, and the informal session that we held with the GMC then on Tuesday. I think both were really, really good discussions, and I think the Minister had outlined that it was his intention to bring forward legislation on duty of candour within this mandate. So I would like to propose that we write to the Minister to get clarity on that as to whether he is or he isn't, because it wasn't, it wasn't very clear. So it would be good to know, because I think certainly there's a big appetite for that to happen. So are members content with that? Okay. Members, you'll also be aware that on the 28th of October we had a session with VOIPIC and Include Youth. And I just suppose to mention, it was a really, really good session for anyone that was there. It was really useful for us to engage with the young people, particularly on the implementation of the Ray Jones report and its recommendations. So I suppose to thank the committee staff and the staff at Include Youth and VOIPIC and the young people especially for putting that together, and hopefully we can do more work like that, because it was certainly very, very valuable. Another just a wee notice, on Monday the Heart Failure Warriors event is taking place in the Long Gallery from 10 a.m. to 3 p.m. and agenda is in your pack at correspondence. And we have, the committee had engaged with the organisers at the Nikon event and talked about things around the disparity of services across trusts, and would encourage members to attend the event. And for any of us that were at the British Heart Foundation event yesterday as well, around the gender gap in cardiovascular health issues for women, I think it was really excellent. So it's another area of work I think that we will be looking at going forward, and ties in with the Heart Failure Warriors as well. The only other thing I wanted to mention is that this week is Safer Ageing Week. And we will have been contacted by Hourglass in relation to that, and they have also requested to meet the committee, so we're working at the minute to get that arranged as well. Okay, members. So item number 3 of the draft minutes. If I could refer you to page 6 of your meeting pack, it's the draft minutes of our meeting held on the 24th of October. Are members content with the minutes as drafted? Okay, and I've no matters arising. Has anyone else any matters arising at this stage? No. Okay, members, so we'll move on to our first oral briefing, which is the Northern Ireland Public Services Ombudsman. If I could refer you to the papers at tab 5 of your pack, which include a briefing paper from the Ombudsman at page 17, the Ombudsman Patient Safety Report 2024 page 21, and an Ombudsman submission to the Department from August 2021 on the statutory duty of candour at page 41. You're all very welcome.
Thank you.
And apologies for a slight delay there. In attendance today we have Margaret Kelly, the Northern Ireland Public Services Ombudsman, Sean Martin, Deputy Ombudsman and Director of Investigations, and Corinne Nelson, Director of Investigations. So we're delighted to have you here today, and I think it's very timely given the debate we've had in the Chamber this week and the work that the committee has been looking at as well in relation to this. So members, we have 45 minutes for this session, and it will be covered by Hansard. So just could we be mindful of that, because we do have 2 oral briefings still to get through as well. So with that, I'll open up to yourselves if you can make some opening remarks, and then we'll open for questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Chairperson and Committee, and thank you for the invitation. So I just want to reflect a little bit on our work and then give you the opportunity to follow up and ask us any questions. So the Committee knows that we've given you a paper and we've reflected some of the key issues for us in that. Earlier this year we held a patient safety conference, Patient Safety, Public Trust, a decade of inquiries, what is the learning? And I wanted to reflect on some of our key themes from that and highlight the work that we do that led us to hold that conference. This year we expect to receive around 1,300 to 1,400 complaints in NIPSO, and close to half of those will relate to health and social care. We have a 3-stage process, and the 3rd stage is an intensive 52-week investigation. 70 to 80% of those are health and social care related. And while I acknowledge that we tend to see the cases where things have gone wrong, and often significantly wrong, it does provide us with a detailed knowledge of what happens when things go wrong, how the system responds, where significant failings are, and where there are issues of avoidable harm. I would preface by saying that it is our experience that the vast majority of health and social care professionals turn up every day to work with the best interests of those for whom they are providing care, and that they currently do so in what is quite possibly the most pressurised and difficult environment that we've seen. So the reflections that I give are not criticisms of individuals, but they are reflections on the system. And every system, regardless of how highly we hold the professionals in it, has to be open to reflection and criticism. So sometimes we think everyone complains, but that is absolutely not the case. And all of the international research shows that only about 30% of people who have a very poor experience with a public service, including a serious or significant failing in health and social care, will complain. But what we do know is that in all complaints, openness and transparency is key. It is openness and transparency which makes the difference between resolving a complaint or compounding the harm and trauma that may result from a serious complaint. Unfortunately, in my office, we do continue to see compounded harm and trauma because of a failure to be open and honest after an incident of significant harm. In the last year, not only have I seen many more complaints coming to the office, but I have seen many more serious complaints. I've seen more complaints in the last year where, with appropriate management, death or significant harm would have been avoided than I have seen in the previous 3 years of holding this role. So I've been in my role 4 years now. On average, we do around 80 to 100 of those big investigation reports a year. I see all of those, so I'm reflecting back over the 4 years of my experience. And I just want to give you a couple of examples. There are actually many, unfortunately, that I could draw from, but just so committee understands some of what we see. So a failure to identify a cervical fracture and a misdiagnosis which led to compression of a spinal cord and ultimately death from pneumonia, despite the fact that the patient's family were medical professionals and had been raising for weeks their serious concerns. The intrauterine death of a baby at 34 weeks, where there were what I can only describe as acute feelings, and again, a failure to listen to the mother involved who was raising significant concerns. The failure to manage the severe pain and diagnose sepsis that led to a patient's death. A young man with learning difficulties whose renal stent was left in place for 18 months with no review and no consideration, and which caused kidney damage, despite the fact that he was supposed to have a review within 1 month, and that the manufacturer's guidance say an absolute outside guideline of 3 to 6 months to leave a renal stent in place. And finally, you may have seen recent coverage from Mr. Cull regarding his father's premature discharge and death within 24 hours of having been discharged from hospital due to bowel necrosis that was missed. So that's just a flavour of some of the very serious and significant cases I see. Unfortunately, alongside many of these cases, we have seen a lack of candour, and very occasionally, not just a failure to be open, but the creation of inaccurate records which have attempted to disguise where, when, or if service has been provided. There is provision within my legislation to share my report with professional regulators. I don't do that where it is a matter of a mistake and where there has been open and honesty. So generally I don't. Really, the occasions in which I tend to share my reports with a professional regulator has been when there's been a failure of candour, and in particular where there may have been inaccurate records created. I consider that we have seriously fallen behind developments elsewhere in the UK, and that there is currently an opportunity not simply for Northern Ireland to catch up, but to become a leader in how we approach patient safety and candour. There is currently no patient safety strategy or framework for Northern Ireland. The urgent need for such a framework to drive change at a systemic level is clear. The serious adverse incident process is not fit for purpose, and there is a need to look at how we address failures within the system. In the last 3 years, around 4% of NIPSO reports have referenced SAIs, and in 6 out of the 8 of these, it was linked to patient death. We see recurring issues. We see trusts failing to initiate an SAI when the criteria has clearly been met. We see only initiating an SAI on receipt of a complaint, and with complainants really pushing that they want that. And we see a recurrent failure to properly communicate with patients and families in SAI. I just wanted to reflect to committee from a couple of those reports some of the criticisms that we'd made in relation to that. So in one report I said, I cannot ignore the flawed manner in which the Trust carried out the SAI and the lack of empathy and compassion shown to the complainant. And in another, I found the Trust's investigation was flawed, lacked empathy, as well as a level of basic inaccuracies that caused me great concern. It is imperative that we address SAIs, that we make them fit for purpose, and that we don't focus on the number that we do, but rather we focus on the effectiveness of what we do. Committee will have received our submission on duty of candour, and we in my office believe there is a need for a clear duty of candour. That it has been too long since Mr Justice O'Hara made his recommendations on both an individual and an organisational duty of candour, and that there is a need to take this forward. We think there's also an opportunity to look at some developments, for example in Scotland, where an independent whistleblowing champion has been put in place in the Ombudsman's office there to assist where staff are raising serious issues. So sometimes I think we look at the experience in our health and social care and we think that patients and staff are on other sides of this debate, and in fact I think they are on the same side of this debate, and staff have communicated to us where they have attempted to raise concerns and where that hasn't happened. We are happy to discuss further the Office's position on duty of candour, but we would just draw Committee's attention to developments in England around the Hillsborough Bill. And that's pointing in a future direction of the need for a clear duty of candour, not just on medical professionals, but across the system on public services and health service managers. And I think an indication, certainly in terms of what's been said publicly from the Prime Minister, about a need for a criminal sanction to go along with that. Patient safety is critical, not just to those who use our healthcare system, but also to those who deliver it. It requires change if it is to improve. I absolutely support the calls for a culture of openness, for a just and fair and honest culture, but that will not happen on its own. And I believe it does require the underpinning of legislation, policy and processes to make it happen. And I believe the evidence that comes to my office supports that. Thank you.
Thank you, Margaret. And I think that's been a really, really excellent start to our meeting, because a lot of what you said echoes the debate and the discussion we have had both in the Chamber this week, but over the course of the time that this committee has been in place. So, but I suppose the difference is you actually have the evidence there that's backing that up and verifying what the points we've been trying to make. And absolutely the point around patient safety for the people using our health service, but also for those delivering it. And I think that's the message that we have been trying to make very, very clearly. This is about protecting patients, but also about protecting staff. And as you said, enabling them to safely raise concerns or, and raise issues. I suppose for me, there's just a couple of things. The first thing that really strikes me, and I mean, there's one case I'm dealing with at the minute, and what you've said there it's exactly what has happened here, and it's the failure to listen to patients. The case I had was an expectant mother. It was her 4th or 5th pregnancy, and she raised her concerns with numerous health professionals, and those were dismissed. And the outcome of that was that she has a child who has developed a life-changing condition which could have been avoided. And she has to deal with that now as well. And the investigation into that, he's now coming 12, and that still hasn't concluded. So for me, that is a critical factor in all of this, that we need to ensure that people are being listened to. Before we started this briefing, I mentioned the British Heart Foundation event yesterday, and we heard from 2 young women who, only for their persistence, and a number of us were in attendance, who knew there was something really wrong, and were told it couldn't be your heart, you're only 27. They persisted, and it ended up, both of them were probably at a stage where that could have ended in death. 2 sisters. So, and it shouldn't come to that, I suppose, is the point I'm making. We should be ensuring that, yes, people have professional skills and professional judgment, but listen to your patients, and we could be avoiding a whole lot of this. So in terms of duty of candour, because we have had a lot of debate around this, and I know there are real concerns within the health professional sector particularly, which we understand, and that's why we want to ensure that any process is done in partnership so that we can address those concerns to make sure we have the best outcome. You know, you talked about the openness, the culture of openness, and how that's so important, but we know that's not working in its current form. So what do you feel from introducing the individual and organisational duty of candour with the criminal sanctions? What do you think? How will that change what we're dealing with now? Moving forward, what is your view around that?
So I think it is absolutely necessary to introduce both an organisational and an individual duty of candour. And I think if you look at CQC in England, you will see that there is an organisational duty of candour there with significant criminal responsibility. And if you look, you will see that they actually undertake significant prosecution of organisations around that, and very occasionally of a named individual who has responsibility. I know that it's actually very difficult, and sometimes when I consider this issue, I point out that we are actually all under an individual duty with criminal sanction around GDPR. So if any of us maliciously destroy evidence that has been asked for under a SAR, we actually commit a criminal offence and we can be held liable for it. So I know that it is difficult for health professionals. I don't think that it's something that should be applied simply to the medical profession. I think to create that openness, it has to be applied across the board. And I think it has to be clear that it is not about making a mistake. We see mistakes actually quite frequently. And if there is a genuine mistake made and people are open and honest at the first possibility, we actually find people are very willing to accept that. It is when people don't get that honesty and when they get a drip that it creates real difficulties. So I think it is important that there is both of those. I think, Sean, I don't know if you want to say a little bit about separating out the duty of candour and the criminal responsibility.
Yeah, so I think on the organisational duty, it needs to be very broadly drawn. And I think the proposal that was put in 21 had a fine for the organisation of £5,000 as the upper limit. It's not really about fine, though we did say that we didn't believe that that was enough. It sent the wrong message, and it should be for the judge in the case to determine any financial liability that was on the public service. But actually I think it's the accountability that would come after that, because for a prosecution for the organisational duty of candour, people have deliberately covered up something which has prevented learning and future harm. So I think that needs to be taken really seriously. So I think alongside that criminal responsibility of the organisation, I think there needs to be some clearer accountability mechanisms. I think more generally across health and social care, I think we need to be clearer about accountability mechanisms and how they work and who is accountable for what, because I think it's a bit unclear at times. On the individual duty, the consultation gave 3 options around the individual duty. So there was what Justice O'Hara recommended, there was just the duty of candour with no criminal sanction, and then there was a decoupling. The more we have thought about this, we think there is merit in decoupling the two things. So firstly, the duty of candour is a positive thing, to be open, to be honest, and to help the system learn. Okay, so you have that positivity, and everybody's under that obligation. The decoupled criminal sanction would be about those people who deliberately act to cover up. So this isn't something that you inadvertently do. This is something that you absolutely set a course of action to cover up something that prevents that future learning. So I think there is merit in looking at that decoupling that was in the proposal between a positive duty of candour and a separate criminal sanction. Because I say, for me, when I think about the duty of candour, it's a positive thing. I need to be open, I need to be honest, I need to be helpful, I need to reflect. And we see really good examples. We see people not being candid, but we actually also see really good evidence of reflection, of learning. So we want a system that encourages the duty of candour, but that deliberate act of cover-up and destruction or creation of a false narrative, I think, is something separate that I don't believe the staff in the health service would believe is appropriate. I don't think public servants generally would believe it's appropriate. So I think there is merit in considering that proposal that was in the original consultation.
Yeah, and I mean, I think that's the point we have been trying to make, is that we don't want people being, criminalised for mistakes. And we have said very clearly about, you talked about it, Margaret, in your opening remarks, the huge pressure which makes mistakes a higher risk of mistakes happening. So we recognise that. But the key is, if people feel comfortable and safe to be open about that at the earliest possible stage, that's the best chance of learning and dealing with it. So it's about trying to get that message through. The other thing I wanted to ask is just in relation to the SAI framework, and I think you outlined quite a number of the concerns that we have, and this is a key priority in terms of the committee around accountability and those things. I suppose, again, going back to that point of even the failure of trusts where there is a clear threshold to enact the SAI process is very concerning. We are aware as a committee there's a redesign of the framework. I mean, have you had any insight into how that is going, and do you feel there is proper co-design in process. We have had some issues raised in relation to this, so we're trying to look at that deeper as well.
So I think there's a couple of things. So one, just to pick up on that final duty of candour and decoupling, a recent report that I have done, which was to do with the death of a baby, that was investigated. There was an SAI that went through the process, and the person was still unhappy about that. And when it came to me, one of the midwives to our investigators said that record I created that said I was with that lady at that time providing that care, I actually wasn't there, and I asked somebody else to write it for me. And that only came out at the point at which our investigation kicked in. It's not, I wouldn't say to you we see that often, but it is there. So I would say that to begin with. So I think decoupling and having both those things could be helpful. In terms of the SAI, we do have a concern. We had a little look at the figures on SNI because I think there's been a bit of a narrative of we're doing too many. That wouldn't really be our experience, to be honest. But we found there wasn't very clear figures, but overall it would appear there's around 125,000 adverse incidents in Northern Ireland. And when we looked at the number of those where a SAI is done, it was around 0.3%. So it is a small number, and the majority of those would appear to be a level 1 SAI, which would be done internally and not a level 2 or level 3. So I think there's a number of things. What I see on SAIs is families and patients aren't listened to. Like that, if you're asking me a recurrent theme, my recurrent theme is families and patients aren't listened to. The communication is really poor. The standard of investigation is really poor. It goes on for a really long time. And any redesign SAI process has to have that at its core, addressing that. We have had a reach out from a couple of people who have said just like we don't feel like the patient voice and the patient experience is being properly reflected. We know that they're to come out for public consultation soon. We haven't seen them, and it wouldn't be appropriate. We will respond when we see them. But those themes are constant in the cases that we see. In those serious cases, those themes are there.
Yeah, and I think it would be fair to say probably as MLAs, anything we're dealing with through our constituency offices, we would feel, I mean, I certainly could say that that's a common theme, and that's why it escalates, I think. I think if that's recognised early on, you can deal with things a lot easier. People will be more upfront, but it is then you find that everything is convoluted and a long process. My last question, because I am conscious, but it's obviously, this is a really important issue for us as a committee, is in relation to the learning. And I think I would feel very strongly that we don't see the learning. We've talked about the major inquiries that we are all very aware of, and I suppose that's tied in with the duty of candour particularly, but also in terms of SAIs. I mean, I think some of the people we've spoken have said you could paper the walls with SAIs sometimes, but what is it actually achieving? And I mean, I think even the fact, Margaret, that you've said there's not even enough being done in terms of what should be done, given the threshold and all of that. So, I mean, how do you feel? Are you able to see where there's learning, and do you feel that it's just not there, or what is your take at present? And hopefully, will the redesign process address that, or hopefully?
So, I think that's a very mixed picture. I think, to be honest, we tend to see those complaints where people have gone through an SAI process and been really unhappy, or we see complaints where we think you should have done one and you haven't. And that often the learning from that is not disseminated. So in the case of the baby that died, that complaint came to my office. I was really concerned about the feelings I seen in that, and one of my recommendations was that particular trust would look at that maternity unit and undertake a 3-year review, looking back of all their high-risk cases and look at what the learning of that was. I don't think that the learning from SAIs are properly put in place, and I suppose there is a question about what's your process and mechanism for that learning? How do you share it across all the trust? What's the accountability mechanism for ensuring it takes place? And those are all things that I think you would be looking at in a redesign process to see if they were there. I don't know.
So one of the things we're doing with our own work, so when we make recommendations, we now follow up and we ask for the evidence to show that that has been done. We're just starting to take that further to see if that has had the impact that we expected. So I think that's a good model to look at the SAIs, look at the recommendations that have been made, and have they achieved? So within the organisation that did them, have they achieved? And has that been shared more widely across the system? I mean, we know only too well that investigating takes resource. So if you commit to doing an SAI, it's really, really important that you do it well and that you make those recommendations that will make a difference, and then that those are implemented and shared so that others can learn. So I think, we're very conscious about our own work of ensuring that what we recommend brings about positive change. And I think that will be a key for when we've discussed it for a new redesigned SAI process, that it's clear how both internally within the organisation that learning is embedded and checked and has the impact, but more widely across the system. Because we reckon that on average there's about 500 SAIs reported on each year. That is a considerable amount of investigative efforts, a very small percentage of 125,000 adverse incidents that probably happen. And that's right. So rather than focus on number, you focus on those issues that cause the most harm, and there's a greater opportunity to learn and make difference. Some of the senior people in the health service that we have spoken to think we need to do it differently. They're really clear with us. They don't think either that the current process is delivering what we all expect from it and what they expect. So I think we need to think differently. Obviously, in England, they've gone to the Patient Safety Incident Response Framework. I think it's too early to say whether that's brought about the changes they were hoping for. But I think from what we see, I think there is absolutely no doubt we need to look at a different way of doing it and make sure that we learn and listen.
Oh, absolutely. Thank you. I could ask lots of questions because I just really am interested in all of this, but I'm going to move on. I have Linda.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you to Margaret and to Martin. Really appreciate the briefing. Just in terms of, Margaret, you said that it wouldn't be appropriate that the department would reach out to you in relation to the work that they're doing around the redesign of the SAI framework. Would it not? I suppose is my first question, because I mean, you're dealing with these things all the time. You see where improvements are possible, and is that not the point at which obviously you have the opportunity to do that at consultation, at the point of consultation, and we'll all have an opportunity to do that, but maybe we'd be consulting on a better document if you were engaged sooner. That's the first question I have. And then just secondly, you mentioned Scotland and the fact that they have that the whistleblower champion, and I mean, I'm not sure, I don't have a view of that, but are there other places, whether it be Scotland in relation to that or anywhere else, that are examples of best practice? I mean, you've said England, it's too soon to say, but let's take England out of it. And I don't just mean on these islands. Are there areas where we could look at, here is best practice, these are some of the things we should be doing? That doesn't mean that we don't have to make it suitable for here. You know, I mean, we're a small place, and it just seems really, really strange that we can't manage these issues much better than we are managing it, given the size of this place. And finally, on that listening part, so I mean, you have already outlined not listening to patients. That's my experience. Every single case I deal with in the constituency office, it is always because the patient or the patient's family were not listened to. And you've just alluded to the fact that neither are the health professionals being listened to. That's really frightening. That's the position that we're in. Neither patients' families, so those affected, nor health professionals are being listened to. So redesigning a framework is a bit of I suppose, you have to wonder of the value of that if we are not, if our department and our senior officials are not, and the minister and the entire department are not going to listen to the people who have the lived experience, whether they are the medical professionals or those on the receiving end of treatment, or unfortunately in some cases not on the receiving end of treatment. Sorry, it's long-winded, but best practice and why you've been engaged already, I suppose, are the main points.
So I think we engage in terms of where there are particular reports that have come up, where there are issues around SAIs. I have shared a number of those with the department, and we've certainly met with the departmental officials and said, here is our experience of this, here are the things we think you need to address. And the department certainly came to the patient safety conference and presented, and we're engaged around that, but we don't sit on departmental groups. So just maybe to clarify that, so we would have a degree of engagement, but because of the independence of the office and the investigation role, we wouldn't sit on the SAI groups in that way, but we certainly do feed in. In terms of Scotland as the whistleblowing champion, so my understanding, and I'm sure Sean will tell me if I'm wrong, is that that's probably the first jurisdiction on these islands that has put in place that role, and that is where staff in health services have raised an issue in terms of raising a concern and feel like they haven't been heard. And if they go through that process and really feel like the organisation is not listening to them, then they may bring that to the Ombudsman's office under that national, they call it national whistleblowing role, and the Ombudsman may then give that person a degree of protection and investigate what the organisational response has been and whether or not the organisation has properly looked at the concerns that the person has raised. It's early days for that too. I think the Ombudsman there has probably had that for about 2 years, 2.5 years. But it is one of the things that staff tell us is it's really difficult to raise a concern, and that they often feel that when they raise them, that it is that they feel personally and professionally they are at a disservice. And in fact, the evidence around people, staff who raise serious and significant concerns, is that it does impact negatively on them, both personally and professionally, and there are many examples of that. So the purpose of that national whistleblowing role is actually to provide a place where someone who's tried to raise that in that context can then go independently and outside. We'd have to say, in terms of best practice, I would have to have a look for you, Linda. But I think all the things that we see, and I've no doubt other people have told you, need to be in best practice, so that listening to patients and their families, communicating with them, taking their concerns seriously, doing proper investigation. At one level, we know all those things, and putting in place the legislation, and that includes those bits around duty of candour organisationally and individually, that will actually cause that change, because we've actually been talking about this for a really long time, and I think professionals have had a duty of candour for a really long time, but we certainly haven't seen the shift that you would want to see. Sean, I don't know.
Yeah, Linda, just in terms of our colleague Ombudsman at the time, Rob Behrens, in England, produced a report last year where he looked at 22 deaths in relation to health service, and their role is very focused on central government and health service, so they do a huge number of investigations. But he said 5 key things come out of those specific investigations around death: failure to make the right diagnosis, delays in providing treatment, poor handovers between clinicians, but importantly, reiterating the point you were making, failure to listen to the concerns of patients or their families. So he pulled that out as one of the key things that was contributing to failures in patient safety. So I think, we see that in our work, and it's hard at times to understand, because people are being really clear about what is wrong, and yet they don't seem to be heard. So I think that is a key for us all to try to understand culturally in the organisation, or is it pressures? What is it that is leading to people not to listen and therefore cause harm? And I think afterwards the harm is compounded when you fail to listen again through the complaints process or through an SAI. So I think, we do people a great disservice. There's the failure to listen while care is being delivered, and then the failure to listen afterwards, and we compound the harm that has already been caused.
I really appreciate that, Michael. Apology, Martin. Sean, so apologies for that. Chair, listen, I appreciate those answers. I think that we need to find out, is they not listening because they're not listening and they think they know better because that's a cultural issue? Or is they not listening because they are not being given the time and space to listen? But I know, I'll say again, from my own personal experience in dealing with constituents, very often it is not listening. We know better. Where patients are actually telling a consultant or a medical professional what is wrong with them. They're telling them exactly what is wrong with them. They refuse to investigate what they know is wrong with them, and they spend a fortune and send them to appointments all over the place, looking for things that are not wrong with them. And that, for me, is a big concern. This is costing our health service an absolute colossal amount of money, both because we are failing to diagnose early enough, we're failing to treat properly and on time in a timely manner, and then very often the money we're having to pay out because of people being left with, as you've already outlined, long-term harm or even death. So I think that, this is not about money. This is about best outcomes for people and for human beings. But we really need to get to the bottom of this, and it is a massive culture change. And I know it's easy to be defensive whenever you think you're doing the best you can. We've all been there, as professionals, as elected representatives, and people who very often come off on the hard end of what people have to say. It's easier to be defensive sometimes, but stop and know that you are always going to get the best outcome every single occasion by just listening. Thank you, Chair, and thank you for the presentation. Appreciate it. And the conference was excellent.
Alan Robinson.
Thanks, Chair. When you've a very respected judge like Justice O'Hara and a very respected Ombudsman's Office now painting the picture for change and highlighting the need for change, I think those, or anyone who may have any doubts or any concerns, I think they need to think again. Are you picking up any frequencies? You will be aware of the debate that we had on the floor here earlier in the week. And I don't know about anybody else in the room, but certainly I picked up that there seemed to be still resistance to change within the Department of Health with regards to the duty of candour. Are you picking up any frequencies that there may be that change of mindset now? If there is resistance at the top level of the department, then it's going to be very difficult to try to implement some change at the lower ends of that department. So I'm keen to know, are you picking up anything? Because my view, when I left that floor of the chamber earlier in the week, that no, I think we're still going to be battling this probably in the next mandate.
So I know that when we did the conference in March, at that point there was still a very split view, and I think the departmental view at that point was a real concern about an individual duty of candour with a criminal sanction, and I am not privy to any information that has suggested that has changed. I do think that's quite a heated debate. We meet with the regulators, so we meet with the GMC and the NMC and all of the regulators, and we have had that debate with the regulators that we have a different view on that. I could be wrong. I think maybe decoupling the duty of candour from that criminal sanction that is about willfully covering up may allay fears. I think there's a huge part of it that's about fear, a real fear that somehow mistakes that are genuinely made will be criminalised. And when we've had that debate, that's often what people say to us, and we're saying, like, this isn't about mistakes. Like, we see mistakes, we know mistakes get made, people are only human. And as I say, most complainants I've met, if there's a genuine mistake and people have been open and honest, they actually are really unbelievably accepting of it. It is when you deliberately cover up, and I think there's work to be done being really clear with people that this is about deliberate and willful cover-up, because I think there's some misunderstanding, and I do understand that fear, but I have to say, my role is about access to justice for the ordinary members of the public in Northern Ireland, and it's also about improvement in public services, and it is my view, having been 4 years now in row, that we do need both of those things. We need that duty of candour, but we also need a criminal sanction that is about willful cover-up if we actually want to see change, and that 99% of healthcare staff and indeed managers have absolutely nothing to fear from that.
Thanks, Margaret.
Okay, Alan, thank you. Nuala?
Thank you very much for the presentation today, and it is timely given the debate we had this week in the Chamber, but also what the committee has been doing with regards to all the inquiries that have been ongoing. I want to speak a little bit. I'm glad that we have your remarks now on record regarding the duty of candour. I think it is beneficial, especially when organisations and persons such as yourself, Margaret, come out and say it isn't about mistakes, and I think that's very important. I want to speak a little bit and focus on the relationship between yourselves after an investigation and the trusts or the other organisations. I think I read here, what is it, 377 trusts, 126 about other providers. So after you have an investigation, what is the relationship between yourselves, and let's take the trusts in first instance? Do you report on any themes that continuously come up? Are there performance issues that you recommend? Do you have authorisation to require feedback or confirmation that it's been implemented? I just want to learn more about that relationship after the fact.
Yeah. So in terms of when we get to that further investigation stage, so as Margaret alluded to, we have a 3-stage process. So of those 500 health complaints last year, probably about 100 will go to that final stage of the process. We will have been able to resolve some before that. We do get complaints that come to us first, and one of the requirements of the legislation is you give the body the opportunity to resolve it, and I think that's right. And if we get the complaints process fixed where we listen and engage with people, hopefully less of those will come to us. When we we would share a draft, Nuala, with the organisation to seek their comments around our recommendations, and sometimes we tweak them because they say, we know what you're trying to achieve, but that could be achieved better in this way. We will normally ask them then, when the final report's issued, to send us an action plan with the actions and the timescales. We then follow up, and we've done an exercise internally to check that our staff are actually following up to see that we have got evidence to show that those recommendations have been implemented. I say we're just doing another piece of work now to check whether our recommendations are actually effective. So have they brought about the change that we've been seeking? Now we've just started that piece of work, and we will have to engage with the GPs, with the trusts around, just how, I can think of one where a particular type of cancer, there was a clear gap. You couldn't speak to the consultant. They were really busy, but people had all sorts of questions about the care. They needed to speak to somebody. So one of our recommendations was a cancer specialist nurse for that type of cancer. And again, so we know the cancer specialist nurse was put in place, but has that made the journey for people better? Is there somebody they can contact? So I think we're very conscious of checking to make sure that the recommendations that we make have an effect. We do, and Brenna's team do this day in and day out. We have good engagements from the trust. When we get to that final report stage, it is rare for them not to accept a recommendation that we make and not to engage positively around that. I've been with the office 10 years, and I would probably reflect that has got better and better in terms of acceptance of the independent nature of our office, the recommendations we make. They may not always see things the same way as we do, but they accept that we have looked at it independently, made those recommendations, and they do get on then with implementing them. Margaret and I have seen good examples when we've engaged with senior staff in the trusts of how they then are reporting internally. So some of the trusts in particular will pull out those recommendations we have made, and they will report those up through senior management and to board level to show that they have taken the issue seriously and they have taken steps to implement them. Have I seen occasionally where we have been told something's been done and it hasn't actually been done? Yes, but that is a rarity, I would have to say. And probably that is some time ago. More and more we are seeing those things being taken seriously. I think the Professional Standards Authority made a recommendation in a Safer Care for All report around inquiries as well, that there was actually a need for a mechanism to take all of those recommendations that were made in the various inquiries, and that for somebody to independently check that they had been implemented and that we're having the effect that those who carried out the inquiry intended. And I know you have taken evidence at committee around some of that, and in terms of the oversight board for that, and the challenge, which I think is really good, because if you commit resources to the investigations we do or to a public inquiry, it's really important that we learn and make improvement.
And maybe just to pick up slightly on that, the other thing that Sean and I have been doing is actually going and speaking to the trust boards. And I think there is probably, it is not uniform across all the boards that data on complaints comes, that where there has been an ombudsman report and significant recommendations, that they automatically go to all. Some of them do, some of them don't. And I think there is probably an issue around, in terms of trust boards and their functions and accountability, ensuring that there is a responsibility for all trust boards to consider where there has been significant investigations, significant failings, and that they go to the board.
And on that then, actually just expand on that. But first, before I go to expand on that, are they obligated to comply?
No, they're not.
We work through soft power, and I have to say, and I mean, I come from a regulatory background. We get better compliance through that soft power. This committee, the other committees in this assembly, is the ultimate recourse where our investigations are not accepted and there remains something outstanding. So if that were to occur, we would do a report.
I can lay a special report to the assembly where a public body, not just a trust, but where a public body has refused to accept my recommendations or refused to implement. And in 4 years I haven't had to do that, but should I need to do so, I most certainly would.
Haven't needed to do it, but unfortunately there's still a lot of time. I mean, we talked about the SAIs, and then so you have to go through the trusts the trusts complaint procedures and just say it's an SAI and then to NIPSO. But how many years have passed? How many people have given up? How many have just lost the fight because it's just like hitting a brick wall? And I think we need to fix that, absolutely. But in terms of the relationship, you say, amongst the trusts and the accountability within trusts and at the board, whose role is it to implement it, the chief executives or the board? And then where then does the accountability lie? The chief executive to the board, but does the chief executive sit in the board, and do they have a say? Is there an issue here with the actual accountability structure?
I think, so in terms of the way it should work, obviously the senior management team, including the chief executive, are responsible to the board. The board provide that. They're non-executives. They provide that scrutiny, that challenge, that. So they are an accountability mechanism, in my view. I think between the trust and the senior management team, there's a level of responsibility and accountability there. There's a level of responsibility and accountability with the trust board. There is then also a level of accountability and responsibility, I think, with senior department staff who commission and direct at times the way services are delivered. So I think it's all of those relationships that we need to be clear so that there is accountability and we're clear.
You say need to be, so are they not clear now?
I don't think they're clear.
Okay. So accountabilities, and do you include the you're saying the department, but the SPPGs, so the commissioning of services centrally, then 5 trusts. So is it messy currently in terms of where the accountability structures actually lie?
I think it's less than clear. I think it could be much clearer.
So I think it would be a useful exercise.
And I think it would be worth considering that. I mean, I haven't done a piece of work that's looked at exactly how that works and exactly where all that accountability fits together. But I do think there are times that it's less than clear, and it would be helpful to look at that.
Yeah.
I think that is helpful. I just have one last question, Chair, and this is a separate but linked, and I mean, forgive me if people think I am going on, but families raise it with me all the time. Is there, in terms of whenever there are complaints to NIPSO and there is a conflict of interest, I assume there's people they're not involved in investigating in any public body, and that's the assumption. But in the department and within trusts, with the very people that are contained within inquiries, the very people who have been involved from the very start now sit on implementation boards into implementing the recommendations following inquiries. Is that clear accountability? Is there conflict there? Would you have a view with regards to that, leaving any individuals aside, but is there a conflict?
During investigations, we're clear that if you've been involved in the actions that the complaint relates to, you, other than giving your account and responding to issues, you shouldn't be involved in that investigation, and we're always clear about that. And I think we do find problems with that. So people who have been directly involved involve themselves in the investigation, and that's clearly not appropriate. I suppose the implementation of recommendations is slightly different. If people have, I think, as long as they're contributing in a useful way and they're not the person that directs or controls, and you know it's part of a wider group, it's a difficult one to answer. I suppose it's more difficult because we're not looking at the very circumstances. You know, and again, if you wanted to pick up something in particular with us, we would give a view. But I wouldn't say, in my view, it's an absolute no. I think it would be very context driven.
And we have seen in some of the trusts have moved to, so there's obviously different levels of investigation, different levels of adverse incidents. So some of them have moved to, when a complaint comes in, you know, they will go to the clinician or whoever it is and get a view, but they will ask someone else within the trust to review that. Now again, that's not uniform across all the trusts, but I think certainly very early days, but that looks like it is helpful, so that you're not, you know, it's like asking me, did I do something wrong? Well, you might want to have somebody else have a look at that who works with me. Do you know what I mean? So I think there has been a movement across some of the trusts to build more independence within their trust about how they look at complaints, and I think that's certainly something we'd welcome.
Well, thank you. I think it is another piece of work for us as a committee with regards to the accountability structures, but thank you.
Okay, thank you. Danny?
Thank you, Chair. Thank you for that presentation, and that was very, very strong and quite concerning. And I appreciate, obviously, the vast majority of healthcare professionals are, you know, doing their best for their patients every day, and I'm glad that you highlighted that. The thing that really struck me initially was when you said that you have seen the creation of inaccurate records, attempting to disguise where, when, and why care has been delivered. Now that is absolutely chilling to hear. You know, that's a blatant attempt to cover up and obfuscate and, you know, get away from the truth of what actually happened and shift blame.
And Danny, I would want to be clear, I don't see that all the time. But I could, in the last 4 years, certainly off the top of my head, and taking account of the fact that I look at 80 of those individual reports or more in a year, I could certainly list 4 or 5 occasions where there has what I would call willfully there's been records that have been willfully changed or not properly recorded, or so I want to be clear, in the vast majority of cases I don't see that, but I do see it occasionally.
For me, that absolutely underlines why we need a duty of candour with you know, an individual and an organisational one. I think there's no question about that. If you're saying that again and again, and that these not, in the majority of cases, but they do happen, and that's absolutely underlines why we need that. So thank you. The other thing that really struck me was when you mentioned recurring issues. Now, if we have a proper complaints process and a proper accountability, there shouldn't be recurring things, because the recurring themes should be addressed and then they wouldn't recur. The fact that you are seeing recurring things, and one of them was being the trust's failing to initiate SAIs. Now, again, that's hugely concerning to hear, and that is a recurring theme that you're seeing again and again. So, what I'd like to ask about is, what do you think's driving that? Is there an issue with the threshold for SAIs? Is it being ignored? Is it not understood well? Is it ill-defined? I think, could you speak to that as with regards to even what you would see as a duty of candour and an individual duty of candour for that?
I think in terms of the recurring themes, one of the big things that we're doing as part of the engagement on complaint standards, one of the key things is about data and use of data. So health and social care in some respects are ahead of the curve in that they collect information and they make it public available. Not all sectors do that. But I think we could do better. We get between 6,000 and 7,000 issues of complaint that are recorded, given the number of patient interactions that there are in health and social care, that's tiny. I suspect the number of complaints is way beyond that. And there's always a balance between recording and the effort in recording, but I think we need to capture more data so that the men can do better analysis of what those issues are, what led to them, what can we do, so that they aren't those major recurring themes. So I think collection of data, analysis of data is a big thing for us in our complaint standards approach. And we did an event 2 weeks ago where we brought people over who've done some work across the UK virtually, and they engaged with people in our health and social care system around how they've made strides forward using the same system as we use Datex to capture more data, analyse that data and use that to drive improvement and learning. So I think there's a lot more we can do in that. My sense is there's agreement within the system to do that, so that we learn, that we capture the data, that we analyse that data and we use that to drive improvement both at an organisational level and across the system, because those recurring themes are there. Their failure to listen, particularly in SAIs, the ones we see are the failure to identify, even when at times people are saying we think this is an SAI, and we look at it, we go, yeah, it absolutely, I have the definition written in front of me here for an adverse incident and a serious adverse incident. So it's hard to understand when something has that potential, because it doesn't have to have caused harm. It's about the potential to cause serious harm. Why then that isn't seen and taken forward? We do see sometimes where it's not even recorded on Datex. It hasn't gone on in the first place. So the checking mechanisms that would be there then perhaps to trigger the SAI, because it's not there. I think
Could you just explain that again? Because if there is no Datex, how do you know the incident happened?
we get a complaint.
You get a complaint,
Yeah.
which then triggers.
Yes.
So we would say, and triggers an SAI, so we would say where it is the complaint. So I suppose I would say a number of things. Does the system work well in the very vast majority of cases? Yeah, it does. But where things go wrong and when things go wrong, is that working well on the basis of what I see in my office? No. And we would, we have seen many cases where it is the complaint. There's been a really serious incident, normally, to be honest, that's caused actual harm. So not whether there's potential to cause harm, but whether there's been actual harm that hasn't led to an SAI. The person complains, and as a result of that complaint, either coming to me or as part of that process, that's what triggers it. And that does happen. And I think when you talk to health trust leaders, and we do talk to health trust leaders and we talk to health trust staff, and if you said to me, do I think that they are committed to trying to deliver the best system, I actually think there are. But if you never look at what goes wrong and how do you make it better, then you don't improve. And the thing is, improvement is a continuous process. And I think in terms of how we deal with harm, how we deal with people who make complaints, how we deal with addressing the issues that come from inquiries, we certainly have lots of improvement to make. And I think it is part of that journey.
I wrote out a quote from Liam Donaldson, which struck me as really relevant to the evidence we're given today. And it said, "To err is human, to cover up is unforgivable, to fail to learn is inexcusable." And I think that's very relevant to what this committee is grappling with and trying to take forward. And I think, that is someone who was very much involved, in the delivery of health in England and contributed to some of the reviews and work that was done here. So I think, it is that we all know mistakes will happen. It is, we need to own them. We need to try and make it better and learn from that. And I think, and when I debated with the health regulators around that, everybody agrees with candour and the need for candour in the system. I think what we disagree with is how we get it to work. But I think we shouldn't lose that prize, and in the overall debate, we need to make decisions around it and then move forward. We're nearly 5 years, no, we're nearly 7 years on from Justice O'Hara's recommendation. In terms of those recommendations have been made before, back in 2013. They were made for that in England. It wasn't taken forward at that time, and now we're revisiting it with Hillsborough. So I think in some respects, some of the evidence that the committee has received has said that Northern Ireland might be an outlier, and it might be, creating a problem for us to recruit clinicians. I actually think if we get this right, the opposite could also be true. If we do the cultural work, and we all agree there is a need for legislation and work around culture, supporting staff, allowing them to speak up, so the Speak Up Guardians, and some of the other work that's been done in other places. So I think if we get it right, the prize is worth pursuing, and all the different perspectives that we had on the debate on Monday, and the different perspectives there might be in this room, are helpful to get to the right place, but we need to take decisions and move forward.
One of the key things I think for the duty of candour is about rebuilding public trust in the institutions, and the public trust has been shattered by inquiry after inquiry. What I noticed in your report as well is that the trend of the amount of complaints is going upwards. So we are getting worse. I don't think we're complaining more. Do you think there's more incidents, or are we complaining more?
That's a good question, and in truth I'm not entirely sure of the answer to that. We've done quite a lot of engagement in the office, so it was really important to me coming in. We are that alternative access to justice, we're the alternative to the courts, and we are free and independent and impartial, and I think you need to know about that to use it. And when I came in, I did have a concern that people maybe weren't really aware of the office and didn't know exactly when to come and how to use us. So we have done quite a lot of engagement, so it's hard for me to say at this point what exactly is driving that. There is there's real pressure on public services, and when there's real pressure and people are under pressure, things go wrong. So it could also be that. So I think it's quite hard to give a definitive answer. One of the things I would actually want to say to committee is that when we do those big 52-week investigations, they are really thorough. They are finely balanced judgments. We go to independent professionals in Britain, and we do an equivalent clinical specialty to really consider the notes. So when we do those and we make those findings, that is never done lightly, and it's done with a real degree of rigour, and we share those with the public body, and we also share it with the complainant. So the things that I have drawn on today to share with you are obviously some of my most serious concerns, but they have been rigorously and independently considered and investigated, and I think long and hard before I say that on the balance of probability that death was preventable or that harm was preventable. And I would, when I'm trying to make that judgment, me and the team draw on those clinical specialties that help us do that. So I just would want to be clear that we don't arrive at those things lightly or without due rigour.
I think, Danny, we do see harm that is caused by lack of resources. So on occasions when you say, what's the staffing complement for this ward, you will find that when it happened, they were not at the complement. So people are doing their best in very difficult circumstances, and I think that is one of the factors the system has been struggling with, to make sure that we have safe staffing levels. So safe staffing is an important patient safety issue.
And certainly that's something that we're very much in favour of, and we hope that the Minister will bring in. The pressures on the system are incredible at the minute, so we hope that's the case. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Diane?
Thank you. And thank you for your leadership in this. This is a difficult area, and it is important that you're giving the leadership you are, because I know the judgments are finely balanced, and I know there are huge things at stake for families and patients as well as staff. So I do think it's important to say that, and I apologise for not being here. I was at another event, which again overran. But anyway, very quickly, the thing I'm interested in is really to follow up some of the stuff that Nuala talked about. So I'm really interested in learning and accountability. And it seems to me that what you've given us is a very mixed picture across all of the trusts in terms of learning and accountability. And it seems to follow a general trend in both health service provision to patients and to the general population, in a lack of consistency across what is a relatively small population in Northern Ireland. And I think we need to try to understand how we get to that consistency. Because if trusts are to implement reform, which is about consistency and about doing things better, but they can't, initiate the kind of learning and accountability, then I think that's a big problem. So that's the first thing. The second thing I want to do is, do you have any stats around the length of time some of your investigations have taken in order to get to that final report? So from that initial complaint to the trust, through to investigation by the trust, through to saying, because one of the things that I really think that people are losing faith in the system because they have to fight the system so often. And, this week I talked to Claire Roberts' parents. 30 years later, they're still at court cases. That's intolerable. It's intolerable. Now, they may well be an exception, but there is a very long time, and I would, if you have some statistics around that, I think that would be helpful. And secondly, and finally, the idea of how do you make people accountable? How do you actually... we saw West Street, and noticed there was a headline in the Times, I don't know whether this is made up by the paper, I'm sure there's an element of truth in it, where West Streeting has said, if NHS chiefs don't perform, then they're going to be sacked. Where is the accountability mechanism in Northern Ireland?
I'll maybe do a little bit on timescales and learning. So in terms, we've commissioned some research around learning from complaints, and there's not a huge amount of research there that shows that how you do that well, but we're drawing that together and we're going to publish something on to try and help us do that better and feed that into our work on complaint standards. Timescales, so we see complaints that go on for years with the Health and Social Care Organisation before they come to us. They're probably with us a couple of years at the other side of that. So we would sometimes say exactly what you've said. You have to be a marathon runner. You have to have perseverance. We do believe there are people who have real genuine concerns and harm has been caused, but they actually haven't got the emotional capacity to pursue it through a complaints process. And that's one of the things that we're trying to work on in the complaint standards work. We need to do our investigations quicker and more robustly in terms of a rigour within the investigation process. That would mean that more of those issues are addressed by the organisation and they don't need to come to the Ombudsman and the length of time. Obviously, when it gets to us and it gets to that third stage, you would expect that we will take the time to meticulously consider everything. But the hope would be that that would be addressed much earlier. While I can't give you statistics on it, I can tell you from my experience, from Margaret's experience, from Corinna's experience, we see investigations that go on for years. I have a lady who deals with me regularly and contacts me, and she is still concerned and still fighting about care that she received in 2006. So, it stays with people, the harm is compounded. So I think that's not good for anyone. Margaret and I also met a lady who the incidents that happened 30 years ago, and she still carries that and that desire for justice as she would see it. So I think that is not helpful. I don't think we need to find a better way of more rigorously looking at the issues that are raised and providing answers earlier, and then feeding that back in to help improve the system. I think you want to pick up on the accountability, Margaret?
So consistency, it is a mixed picture. We do see a mixed picture, and I don't think that'll be a surprise to anyone. I think you all see it too. And I think there are issues about accountability. I don't think accountability is always as clear as it could be. And I think if the department need to look at a patient safety framework. So I think only looking at SAI, only looking at Candor, I actually think you need to look at the whole picture. And if you're looking at the whole picture, then the accountability and really clear lines and mechanisms of accountability, I think are one of the things to consider. I don't have at the moment where I'm saying to you, like, this needs to change or that needs to change, but I think there are issues even in terms of that inconsistency across trust, even in terms of how different people look at their complaints or report on their complaints differently, even in terms of how different trusts deal with when ombudsman reports come. All of those, I think, never mind those bigger issues of accountability, I think that is something that all contributes to a patient safety framework and a really good patient care. So I think they are all of the things that need to be looked at, and that also includes workforce.
I mean, I've seen it referred to in the past as it shouldn't be a postcode lottery, and I think we would all agree we are a small place, yes. Around 2 million people. The safety of the service you get should not differ depending where you access that. So I think, and it's a game around the accountability mechanisms and structure, and I think Margaret is right. That could be a key issue for a patient safety framework, where we set out clearly in that framework who is accountable and responsible for delivering safe and effective care to the people. I think we're very clear that our healthcare workers do a really good job, and we've all experienced and benefited from that. But things do go wrong, and it takes far too long for the open and honest explanation of what happened to come out.
I just asked just lastly, because it's a huge subject. It's absolutely a massively important subject. And I have to remember also that our healthcare workers are almost holding up a broken system. And that's not good for anybody, and it's not good for being open and transparent as well. And we have to acknowledge the real important work that they do in helping us in terms of health. But are the sanctions that are available enough? And what are they? And how are they applied? So if there's sanctions to a trust, £5,000 fine doesn't seem a lot of money to a trust to me. So how do we get to how do we get to real accountability?
So I think a monetary fine against an organisation in the public sector isn't really helpful, because you're removing money.
It's just
from
it around
line.
The system.
Yes. So I think it is. I think about really considering the issue of accountability in the system and being clear where those lines of responsibility and their accountability lie between the structures within the department, including SPPG and other parts of the department, and then in terms of trust, the trust board, and then senior managers in the trust. And I think there is a piece of work around that which could be done as part of a patient safety strategy or framework which sets that out clearly, so we all know. I mean, the accountability normally in any organisation is the senior people, and in most organisations there's a board, and it's their role to hold those senior people to account. I think then if that board fails to perform, then I think it's clear that the department have some responsibility to, for that. So it's about setting that out, and I suppose then the issue is if we think there is a failure to deliver within the department, what is the accountability mechanism for the department, which I assume is to the minister and to this assembly. So I think it's about looking at the various levels and where is their responsibility and accountability, and setting that out clearly. I think a fine of a public service like a trust is already under pressure isn't the way to do that, I don't believe.
And I think there is a complexity to it. So as part of taking a look across, I did look at the Care Quality Commission and some of their work around the duty of candour and that failure by organisation and occasionally individuals. And it is, I think, maybe worth committee maybe asking someone to take a look at what the Care Quality Commission have done on that. I just had a very preliminary look. And the other thing that I would say is there is significant medical negligence bills in Northern Ireland, which is the other thing that I looked at. And I find that the people who come to my office aren't looking for money. The people who are coming to my office are looking for things to change. And the most common thing that people say to me is, I want to know what happened. I want somebody to tell me they're sorry, and I want to make sure it's not going to happen to somebody else. And I think there are three really good drivers to think about when you're thinking about how do you help make that change to actually, and how do you hold accountability on it. But it is, it is complex, and we are obviously a part of that system around complaints, but we are only a part of it.
Thank you. Colin?
Thank you, Chair. Thank you for the presentation. Such an important issue, not least because of the litany of examples that we have of where things have gone not just wrong, but terribly wrong. And not least by the fact that the reference that you made, Sean, to the Donaldson report, which goes back so many years, and yet here we are, there hasn't been a single change to the system. We haven't changed the culture, we haven't changed the organisation, and by default we're not changing the individual behaviours, and as a result we're dealing day and daily in our offices with cases for people that are being impacted. I was wondering, just a few questions on the SAIs as sort of been an indicator of where things kind of are going fairly badly wrong. You've referenced the number that there are. Is that something that's increasing? And how are we in terms of benchmarking against other places, for example, England, Scotland, Wales? Are our SIIs more than there, or ours less than there? Are we at a similar level, or...?
Well, I don't know about you, Sean. I'd have to go and check. It's hard to know if they're increasing or decreasing because it's actually quite difficult to get the figures. So some of the trusts report on their quality report on the number of adverse incidents and the number of SAIs. The department, I think, does a central SAI report, but that doesn't tell you all of the adverse incidents.
Yes.
So I don't know if you know, but
Yeah,
I would need
so
to check.
I suppose in terms of I think there was a response put up in response to a question around SAIs, and what it said to me when I looked at it, I think it was up to September of this year, is it varies considerably from year to year, from maybe about 350 to, over 500 serious adverse incidents. I looked at 22-23, I think Belfast Trust reported 51,000 adverse incidents. They say we found some of the figures for other trusts and that. So I think there's a variation, and the year before I think it had been 43,000. So but I think you would need to do a piece of work which we haven't done, and I say we're not in possession of that data. That was us looking for it, and I say it would be a useful exercise to see if somebody did collate that. Is the number of adverse incidents increasing, and is the number of serious adverse incidents investigations increasing? And I say the serious adverse incidents are collated centrally, and that information is available. I don't know that we have a sense of they're going up, and again, you need to do that over time. When you're looking at a 5 or 10 year time scale. So how has this changed? I think in terms of comparison, we've alluded to the fact that England has changed its system to the patient safety incident response framework. So I think it's difficult to do comparisons with other jurisdictions. And again, I certainly don't have that data, and it might be something that would be useful to ask for the department to see. I'm sure they have done some reflections and comparisons as part of the work that they have done.
I appreciate it's not your job to do that comparison, but I suppose where the comparison will be interesting is we have to have a yardstick of whether we're any candour or any other things that we're putting in place is helping or not. And the way that, maybe a very superficial way would be, if there's less SAIs, then obviously the system, the culture that we're getting is right at driving that down. And if places like England, Scotland, Wales are ahead of us because they've introduced various bits and pieces, then we should be able to see from them whether that's helping their culture improve. Because if it isn't, maybe we could learn from that to find other ways to be able to improve the system, because the key thing is improving the outcomes for patients. And if they're delivering a system over in England, Scotland, Wales, and it's not driving the SAIs down, then maybe that system isn't actually doing it, and we could learn from that and implement it into the changes that we bring in. And you'd mentioned a couple of times, and it's really worrying to hear those cases where people are deliberately and willfully changing figures and changing facts and doing that sort of stuff. Did you say at the moment, is there something, is that currently breaking the law?
Well, not for us, it would be the agencies to do it, but I think in terms of the thing that Margaret alluded to was where there's a subject access request for information if you willfully destroy. We're all subject to that in all public services. So I think the things that we're seeing are not that. So they're not people taking medical records and shredding them. We have seen missing pages in nursing care booklets and so on that have been removed. And again, that's a one-off. It's not a frequent occurrence. There are other areas of law which I think would be interesting to see. Clearly wouldn't be their intent to cover that sort of thing, but they may. But I think it would be much clearer if we were clear about what is acceptable behaviour, and that's back to that decoupling of our duty of candour from something that we would then say appears to be criminal behaviour. So that willful destruction of records,
Where
that
we
willful
go
cover
with
up.
that at the moment is the professional regulator. So when I see that, that seems to me to be conduct that is not appropriate for someone in those professions. So my route, if you like, at the moment is to share that report in detail with the professional regulator and ask the professional regulator to then undertake their process. So I share that report and they undertake their process where they consider my report. They obviously interview the person and they decide what action to take forward. So as it wouldn't fall, that, to my understanding, that is the route. I think, I don't know if there's any other legal route, but that would certainly be the route we go. And my legislation specifically allows me to do that in those circumstances.
Willfully getting in the way of your investigation should be something that people should be able to go to, Margaret. Maybe just finally, you'd said about investigations taking years within the trust and within yourselves. In a gentle way, and again, knowing that you're interacting with the processes that are in other place, how long does it take years? You just put people in a room and say we're dedicating a day to find, because I presume it's down to we write to you and they say something, so we've got to write to them and then we have to wait till they come back and do that. But if we were honest about it, we just put people in a room, in a space, or in a day within within a week to try and get something done, because it just isn't acceptable to go on for years, and it's literally because of letter and email chains going back and forward and people answering things. Is that what it is that's taking the time?
I think there are probably a number of things that in our experience and when we see investigations take the time. So it's partly what I would call a drip. So someone raises a significant or serious complaint and the first response is, no, there was nothing wrong there. And then the person says, no, there was, and I want to know exactly what this was. And so you get a drip of information, and in my experience, that really does damage trust and confidence. And people would be much better to come out and say, you've raised this, there's potentially an issue, let us take a really proper look at it, and we'll come back to you. So you do get caught in a process, and sometimes trusts will go over and over the process, and I understand trusts are balancing a number of things. They're balancing staff needs, clinician views and opinions, medical views and opinions, they're balancing patient needs, and they have to pull all of that together. There are other issues, I think, particularly maybe where it goes to SAI, issues about the level of training that we give people doing SAIs, the level of independence of chairs and how well they're supported to do that. So you can get into a real round, particularly where something is serious, and then as that moves on, sometimes more and more information comes out, and then eventually I think often people end up in those situations coming to us because they feel like, well, every time I ask a different question I get a little bit more information, and I have lost my trust. And then it comes to us, and we obviously, the person brings their complaint to us, we go to the public body and say, we've had this complaint, can you share with us? And then it's a matter for us to really begin to look at those documents and records and then get on board clinical advice. So is a little bit of it, and to be fair, complaint handlers, so we did some work where we spoke to complaint handlers, not just in trust, but in trust and other public bodies, and being a complaint handler can be quite a difficult job. And you can often find yourself caught, I think, between a rock and a hard place, and complaint handlers can find that they ask. So you go back to whoever provided the care and you're asking them to give you the care records and to provide a response. And we will have seen from the neurology report where the consultant involved there, one of the actual red flags was his failure to engage with the complaints process and his failure to properly and appropriately respond where complaints were raised. So it is partly that you don't get everybody in a room, it is partly that chains going back and forward, but it is also about managing that complaint handlers trying to get responses, and we have been doing some work with the trusts, and again an inconsistent pattern, some doing really well on getting those responses, some doing less well. So we've been trying to do some work with them, We've met with all the chief executives and we have shared with them where their trusts are on that response. I mean, it is about trying to help people improve, and that is the focus of our work, but sometimes that does also mean sharing those difficult things that we see.
So one of the indicators we think that we may see if we start to get an open culture and we start to embrace complaints and learning from them is actually complaints might go up. You will resolve more of them at the local level. And I think there is a pressure in the system that to respond to complaints, these are clinical staff who are really busy delivering care for us and they have to respond to the complaints and they have to find the time. So it is about the importance attached to an SAI or a complaint, and that is about the leadership of the organisation saying, no, actually SAIs and complaints and learning from them is really important, and that message coming down through, because Margaret's right, when we engaged with the complaints handlers, I think it's fair to say some of them felt unsupported. So when they said, look, we need to get a response to this person, they had nowhere to go. So they have a complainant who wants a response, but no real support internally in the organisation in terms of that leadership saying, my complaints team are really, really important, and when they ask you, you need to give them a response, and it needs to be thoroughly looked at to enable them to respond back to the complainant. So we think if we get the complaint standards work right, we would hope over time that people will get answers quicker and that they will be clearer and that they will hopefully get what they want through the complaints process.
Thank you. And finally, Alan Chambers.
Thanks, Chair. Margaret, I apologise for not being here for the start of your presentation, but just for the record, I do really appreciate and fully support the work of your office. Organisational duty of conduct is already in place in England, Scotland, and I think just recently introduced in Wales. Are you getting any feedback from colleagues in those jurisdictions that the organisational duty of conduct is actually working for them? Or are they pursuing the addition of an individual duty of conduct with criminal sanctions? And my second sort of question would be around the unintended consequences that have been referenced in relation to an individual duty of conduct with criminal sanctions. Does your organisation recognise the potential of unintended consequences that could have an adverse effect on patient care generally? And do you take that into, or would you take that into consideration in adopting a position on the issue? Now, I fully understand why you're adopting the firm decision or position that you have. So I wonder if you could maybe give me some insight on those couple of issues.
I'll start with the organisational duty, and I think so in terms of what's proposed here and then what's happening elsewhere. So I think obviously as proposed by Justice O'Hara, it was a wide-ranging organisational duty beyond health trust to all the organisations, including the business service organisations, patient client council and so on. And I think our view that is the right way to go. And I think sometimes the point of the law is to say this is what we as a society expect. It is not about taking people to court and criminalising behaviour. It is about setting a standard, and we have good examples over the years where legislation drives change. So some of us who are old enough will remember when we drove about without wearing a seatbelt, huge safety issue, and we didn't wear them, and when the law changed, that was the change in behaviour. We debated second-hand smoke and the risk to workers for years and years and years, and then eventually we took the plunge and we said, no, it's not okay to smoke indoors, it creates risk to others. So sometimes legislation is about saying very clearly as a society, now we believe this behaviour is not acceptable and we are going to act to protect you all. So I think the organisational duty for me is part of that. It's us saying we expect, and it's not just health trusts, it's all the public sector. We expect you to be open, honest and candid in terms of how you deliver your things. If something goes wrong, and the way the legislation obviously works is it's above a certain threshold, then you need to be open about it. I think you should be open about when things go wrong, full stop. But I think just in terms of those serious incidents, then you need to come out and tell the patient or their family is what the duty is. I don't have any direct information that would suggest it's working particularly well in Wales where it's just introduced, or Scotland or England. I don't have that. I haven't had any feedback to suggest there's something that we can learn from others. I know obviously the department officials probably are looking at that and looking at what best practice looks like, so that when they consult on the Being Open framework, then perhaps we'll get some more helpful information on that. And then, Margaret, if you want to deal with the adverse effect on staff around the individual duty and criminal sanction.
So, Alan, we have talked to health regulators about it. Sean and I have been invited on numerous occasions to talk to nurses and GPs and doctors, and you will not be surprised that this comes up. And do I think that is an easy decision around the individual duty of candour? I actually don't. I think it's quite a difficult decision. I think it's an easy decision to say individuals have an individual duty of candour, but in fact, as we sit, every single healthcare professional has that under their professional code, and yet we do still know that is not working well in practice. And I think one of the things that we were saying earlier is we think you could put a legislative duty of candour on individuals, and I think that is about setting standards, and you could do a separate offence which is about willfully covering up, and that you might, for healthcare professionals, if you separate those two things out, that might actually be clearer for people that it's not about making a mistake. And that is one way. And I think the more that we obviously did that response some time ago, the more that we've thought about it, we've started to think, well, actually, given all our conversations, given the fact that people definitely confuse making a mistake with willfully covering up, we think that, that might be one way to deal with that. I think it's interesting because I think in England, it seems to me what's been said to date seems to indicate that they are moving in that direction. Not just for healthcare professionals, but for senior public servants, and that there will be individual duty with a criminal sanction. Was that a difficult call for me in the office? It actually was. I think it will be like that criminal sanction that we all have under GDPR. I think you will very rarely see it used. But I came down on balance that I thought there did need to be something on that to actually properly move us forward. And I do understand when healthcare professionals say to me, that's difficult. I suppose it's also part of the reason why I think that as senior public officials, we should all have that responsibility put on us, so it's not just particular to healthcare professionals. So I do accept that there are two sides to this debate. I have gone on the basis of my experience in the office, and I think it is for all of you as Assembly members who'll be making that call, and while I can express an opinion on it, thankfully it's not my decision.
Thanks for that. Thank you.
Okay, look, I know we are well over time here, and I'm conscious we have two more briefings, but I mean, I think for all of us, this is such a really, really important topic, and I have to say that's probably one of the best briefings that I have received at committee. It's been very, very clear, and I think it has really helped to crystallise a lot of the key questions we've had in relation to this and the concerns. So thank you all. We do really appreciate your time.
Thank you, committee. Thank you.
Okay, members, again, apologies. I know we have well overrun time.
Okay.
5, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Okay. We've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Okay, members, so just coming out of that, there are two proposals I was going to make, that we, first of all, we write to the department for a time frame in relation to the consultation on the SAI redesign. It would be good to see where that's at, in terms of when we can expect to see that being launched. And secondly, I think it would be, I mean, the stuff around the accountability framework and obviously there are issues in relation to that. I think it would be good to get to maybe ask Assembly Research to look into that across the department and across trusts if members are agreeable. Yeah, still got quorum. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Yeah. Okay, thank you, members. I think we've just people have temporarily jumped out. I'm going to move on then to our next briefing, and it's the Department of Health on Addiction Services. if I could refer members to tab 6 of your pack, which includes a departmental update on the implementation of the substance use strategy and a departmental written brief from June 2024. Hey, Gary. And just to welcome, we have Gary Maxwell, Head of Health Development Policy Branch, Kevin Bailey, Health and Social Wellbeing Improvement Manager, the Public Health Agency, and Julie Haslett, Social Care Lead for Mental Health Community Care Directorate in the department. So firstly, if I can apologise for the delay and appreciate your patience. We probably have about half an hour to 45 minutes max here, so if I can ask members to be very mindful of that. The session will again be covered by Hansard, and if I could invite yourselves to make the opening remarks. Thank
no
you.
problem. I can cut it short if you want for more time for questions, but I'll just do a few quick
No
statements.
problem.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, committee members, for bringing us along. It's a really good opportunity to update you on the work we're doing on the substance use strategy, preventing harm, empowering and recovery. As I said, I'm Gary Maxwell. I'm from the Health Development Policy Branch, and I look after the strategy from a strategic policy and legislation point of view. I'm joined by Kevin from the Public Health Agency and Julie from SPPG, and they really lead on the commissioning and delivery of the strategy as we take it forward. And I think a key thing I'd want to flag at the start is one of the things when we looked at the old strategy and into the new strategy was about how we collectively work as a health service to address the issues around substance misuse, because they cut right across all the different tiers. And I would want to stress that actually we work as a team across the health service to really deliver on the new strategy. I think I'd also just like to sort of reiterate that it goes outside the health service, it goes outside the remits of the Department of Health, and we work really closely with our other departments in issues like homelessness, justice enforcement, and really bring those issues together and work on those as well. I wouldn't want to not mention the community and voluntary sector, who we also work with as real partners in this area and are real key delivery agencies for us, but also really importantly those with lived and living experience of substance use and their families, and bringing that real expert experience into what we do from a policy point of view and commissioning and a delivery point of view. There's also issues that go east-west and north-south with substance use, and we're really closely linked into developments in both the UK and Ireland through the British Irish Council Substance Misuse Group, but also the North-South Alcohol Policy Advisory Group. We've given you a written briefing, I think, over the summer, and then we've given you a more recent update on the actions that were rated as amber in our update, and some of those might not be rated amber now, but we can get into that in the detail. But I suppose I just wanted to reiterate substance use remains a key priority for the department and working across the executive to deliver on this. And I would also say Minister, since he's been in post, has had a real focus on health inequalities and made that one of his key areas of focus. And if we look at substance use, they are the largest inequalities that exist in health outcomes in Northern Ireland. If you look at drug-related mortality, those in the most deprived communities are 6 times more likely to die of a drug-related death than those in our most deprived communities. So I think this is a real key focus in terms of how we take that work forward. I'll press some of that and come back to it, but I suppose to say, over the last couple of years, we've really focused on delivering a number of key actions. Those are around a rapid review of opioid substitution therapy in prisons, a Western Trust needs assessment, review of our inpatient services, consultation on minimum unit pricing for alcohol, consultation on a new strategic delivery plan, putting robust governance structures in place across the piece, work on developing our outcomes and indicators. And you'll also be aware the committee, we've recently done some work, and thank you for your support around expanding the supply of naloxone in Northern Ireland, which is a really key piece of work. Those are kind of headlines, but I'd sort of reiterate that underneath that, there's a lot of work goes on day and daily in terms of maintaining the system, trying to make the system better. And this is a real part of the reform agenda within the department. How do we better link up across different domains of health, but actually how do we really improve services within the existing pathway? So our next big step, I think, is the launch of our strategic plan, which the PHA and SPPG colleagues have led on. And that's the 26th of November. And I think the committee hopefully have had a letter of invite to attend that event. And really that'll set out, I suppose, the key bits and the next steps as we're going through that. Really focusing on 8 priorities: prevention, early intervention, pathways, trauma, family support, stigma, workforce development, digital innovation, and data and research. And we've really engaged with a lot of people in the development of that plan. Over 150 people, including those with lived experience, have been really deeply involved in that. And it's taken us slightly longer maybe than we would have wanted to get through that. But I think the process has been really useful in terms of really refining and preparing for what we're going to do going forward. So I think that will hopefully be a really good piece of work and hopefully really set us well forward. I think the important thing about that plan will be, yes, it's for health services and it's about delivering in line with guidance, NICE guidance, drug treatment and support services, but actually other people commission, other agencies commission substance misuse services, and instead of maybe commissioning what they think should work, the plan sets out this is the evidence of what we know, and if there's gaps, rather than going off and looking at something that maybe isn't the most evidence informed, we should be pointing people back to the commissioning plan and saying, folks, this is where we need to fill the gaps, these are the bits that we need to do, this is what those with lived and living experience are telling us we need to do. So I think that will be really important for setting us up going forward. I just want to finish very briefly by talking about alcohol, and I think we often focus on illegal or illicit drug use, and rightly so, but if you look at the figures, and certainly in 2022, more than 2 times as many people died from alcohol-specific causes, which is a much tighter definition than drug-related causes, which is a slightly broader definition. And so I think we really need to keep making the case that within our substance use, alcohol remains our main substance causing harm. And the committee will know on the 17th of October when Minister KME set out his intention to bring forward proposals on minimum unit pricing for alcohol. He believes, based on the research and modelling, that this has the potential to reduce alcohol-related harm and reduce inequalities. We hope this will be considered by the Executive in the very near future, and subsequently the Minister is really keen that we work collaboratively with yourselves in terms of setting out the policy, some of the myths and some of the feedback we got during the consultation that maybe didn't quite understand what the policy actually aims to do, but importantly, where do we pitch that level? How do we get a balanced approach as where we would set that to reduce harm but not impact broader on society more than that? So more than happy to come back in due course on minimum unit pricing specifically, and actually more than happy to come back. I know we're a slightly truncated session today, so if there's issues we want to come up, we're really keen to work collaboratively with the committee on this. I think it's a real opportunity to keep substance use high on the agenda, and particularly to think, how do we address some of that stigma that some of our service users in particularly face, and get the messages out that those are family members, brothers, sisters, daughters, and actually this isn't, about demonising that, it's about supporting people who are going through or had traumatic experiences that impact their substance use and how we go forward. I could go into more detail, but I think maybe more time best spent on questions, so happy to end there if that's okay. Kevin or Julie, I don't know if you want to add anything to that.
Oh, Gary, thank you, and appreciate. Your experience there, because we probably do want to delve into some of it through the question, and appreciate your offer of coming back on any of these things. I suppose, I think your point there just towards the end around these are our family members, brothers, sisters, etc. I listened to a podcast last week just of a woman. It's the I'm not plugging it or anything, but it was one that it really struck me. It was. She's Caroline O'Neill at Dig Mama. Some people would know her. She does a Dig podcast, and she had a lady on who, quite a glamorous lady, quite affluent, came on, spoke about how she was an alcoholic. She's now been sober 10 years, I think she said. And what struck me in that story was how it was so hidden, even within her own household, they didn't realise. And how that can happen. So it's taken away that stigma. So I think that's a really, really critical part, that this isn't, none of us are, can escape this. This could literally happen to any of us, or it's something that can take place, and everybody needs the same support. I've just two really key things I want to ask. My first one, and it kind of comes in the back. Last week we did the joint committee meeting with the Justice Committee, and I had raised questions around the Department of Health input with remand prisoners, but specifically around where people have issues maybe with addiction, and that obviously is linked to their involvement with the criminal justice system. So what part, that's a key part, I think, of this strategy. What engagement have you had across departments? I would have a particular interest in terms of the Department of Justice, because I think there's a huge amount of work that can and should be done there. So I'd be keen to hear a wee bit more about that.
I maybe say something first of all from a strategic point of view, and Julie then maybe in terms of sort of services. We've worked closely with the Department of Justice and all their agencies for a number of years. They are on our oversight bodies. We are also on things like the Organised Crime Task Force to make sure that link up's there. And I think, when we look at things like the problem-solving justice approach, I think substance use is really important within that, because we see a lot of crimes are either substance use related, or they're part of the crime and facilitated by that, or an enabler of. And so I think from our point of view, we're really keen to work, one, at that kind of early stage of how do we intervene early in those cases, and maybe see if there are alternatives to going to the justice settings,
Yes.
about how we might, manage those, or the likes of the substance use court, where somebody has gone through the process, but maybe rather than going into prison, there's opportunities to do treatment-based support and really looking at that, or there's things like enhanced combination orders, alternatives to disposal. And I think we're really keen to work with our justice colleagues and have worked on that agenda with them, and will continue to. There are some resource issues around that, and we appreciate that, and we could probably do more if there were more resources. But I think we know those folks who are homeless, who are through the criminal justice system, are the people who cycle through our services and through the justice system, and we need to look at ways of breaking that cycle and intervening more. So from a strategic point of view, we work very closely, and I think I hope Justice would say we work closely with them as well, although there are always interface issues and bits and pieces like that. Julie, I don't know if you want to say anything about treatment in particular.
Yeah, so we were very conscious of the throughput in terms of the prisons and the remand population, and really commissioned a study to look at our prison population and some of the major challenges within healthcare and prison that are presented there around addictions. And it was really interesting because we do sit as an outlier in terms of the other nations around our remand population. We have a much higher remand population, so a lot of people who are going through that revolving door. So the study really focused on we need to do better in terms of how we look at transitions for people coming in and preventing people coming back in again, so that readmission. So how we do that. We need to upskill our workforce, so look at a kind of multidisciplinary approach, which is also including social work, to take a holistic kind of whole system point of view. You're not just a person that's in prison, but you're a person who sits within the context of a family and a support network and housing and all of that, so how we link up better with that. Also then just looking at the pathways in terms of how we link better between prison, probation colleagues, getting people into treatment much quicker. So there were a lot of recommendations that have come from that we're proactively looking at now with our colleagues in healthcare and prison, with PPNI, with our colleagues in the health and social care trusts in terms of community addiction teams. And also there's a really important part in terms of linking with our housing colleagues as well. Because I think we all know you can't go into recovery if you're lying in a doorway, or you're sofa surfing, or you're in temporary accommodation or a hostel. Yeah. Really difficult. So that part of the jigsaw is really important for us to really work with them on.
No, and that's really good to hear, Julie. And I suppose just from my experience, I mean, the frustration that I have with it is that when people do go into remand, and they can be there for months, as you know, and a lot of those people are maybe never meet the threshold then to be like in prison, where they will then get support. So I always think it's a missed opportunity, because a lot of them people haven't been maybe drinking or taking drugs or whatever it is their addiction is, or which normally stems from a mental health issue. And trauma. And then they are just released out, as you said, maybe with nowhere to go, no support, and they're just back to square one. And in a couple of weeks or a couple of months they're back in. So for me, it's a cost. It's your invest to save, because you're giving people a real opportunity then for a better outcome. So it is good. I would like to keep a track on that, because I think it's a really key piece of work. That was kind of the main piece I wanted to ask. I'm going to bring in Orlia.
Yes, thank you, and thanks very much. It's lovely to see you all again. So yes, Gary, obviously I think that's important to once we get the detail of the launch of the strategic plan, because that's going to be setting out obviously then the direction of travel in terms of commissioning and services, and the point that you made just in terms of that this piece of work has been designed, mainly through people with lived experience, and I just think it's really important to bear that in mind, because at different times different issues will be discussed, debated, you know what I mean, will come up for discussion, but throughout all of that, my main thing is always, I'll be determined by the families that I'm working with, the people that have lost loved ones, the people that are battling with addiction, you know. So just a couple of questions then in terms of, Gary, you have mentioned, so the piece of work that the Minister's taken forward in terms of health inequalities. Is there any specific sections of that work that's directly related to addictions? Because you quoted obviously in the most deprived areas, you're 6 times more likely to die through a drugs death. That's actually the largest health inequality that exists at present in the north. So that's my first question, if there's any specific piece of work around that health inequalities piece. And then in terms of your work with other departments, which is obviously so crucial, the issue around homelessness, because as we know, obviously, you know, the majority of people that end up out on the streets and have nowhere to go are battling with addiction issues. We actually have a meeting with the People's Kitchen and the Department of Communities in 2 weeks' time around concerns that they're going to pull the out of hours service. The housing executive might have to cut back their out of hours emergency service, which obviously the organisations like the People's Kitchen, when they're dealing with emergency situations, people becoming homeless and all the other complex issues that they're battling with, they're saying that if a service like that was to be cut or to be lost, that it would have a massive impact. So as it says, we are going to be speaking directly with Department for Communities on that, but I'm just trying to get a wee sense of your work with Department for Communities. Would you be alerted to issues like that as and when they're coming up? Because you're obviously dealing with people from the health aspect. And then finally, just around the dual diagnosis work. So we had actually done a meeting a couple of months ago with the health worker from the Ward 15.
Yeah.
And obviously, so the issue around dual diagnosis comes up time and time again. So if there's any progress, we've been speaking with the trusts on this, and again, it seems to be that it's trying to get the mind shift, and you're trying to change a culture in terms of 2 departments, mental health and addictions, that work separately. But if there's any update on that, and I know that you sent me a written update on how we then can fit addictions into the MDTs, but just a wee update for the committee. If the hope is that we're going to have the MDTs expanded out across all areas, if there is a role that we can find for addictions to be filtered into the multidisciplinary teams in primary care, because I think that would really hopefully help catch a lot of people in that small net, that small window where they're looking help.
I'll start then the inequalities piece. So I would say, one, the whole strategy focuses primarily on inequalities because we realise it's such a big gap that we need to do that with not losing sight of taking a universal approach as well to prevent those future people moving into those categories. Specifically in terms of, I suppose, Live Better, which is the Minister's pilot initiative around addressing health inequalities. They're engaging currently with communities and looking through the GP registers in those areas to identify what's the issues in those areas that are coming up. I know they haven't picked those yet because they're still working through that, and again, it's to be led by the community and by need as well as what we think we need to do. But I know in one of the areas, one of the issues coming up was prescription drug use in particular, and there may be something specifically we can look at around that. And alcohol may come up in one of the other areas as a key inequality. So I think whatever happens in those areas around addressing inequalities will be helpful in addressing substance use, because substance use is often used as a crutch or as a mechanism to self-medicate for other issues, be that pain, be that depression, be that whatever. So even if it's not specifically focused on substance use, it will have a positive impact for us. I would just say in terms of specific groups, obviously there's the Complex Lives work, which reaches out to those homeless and really at-risk individuals in Belfast and injecting drug users, the Inclusion Health Hub, and work around that. Ken, I don't know if you want to say something about those groups in particular, but that's really focused at cliff edge inequalities that exist within those specific groups.
Yeah, I think one of the things earlier to highlight in terms of policy and strategy is there's infrastructure that each of the 3 agencies are involved with, the FC and the Housing Executive and others, including the health trusts and particularly PSNI in that space. And then there's the operational outworkings of that. So Complex Lives is one such example where we see a multidisciplinary group of professionals coming together across community, voluntary and statutory, that they identify and target those most in need, most vulnerable in our community, and wrap support around them, which is working really well. A big issue in that continues to be access to housing on a long-term basis, not just temporary accommodation. And as such, then we're seeing people coming through with co-occurring issues, so be they mental health and addiction issues, but also physical health issues as well, which sometimes we kind of sometimes forget about in terms of that. We see the two big elements, but physical complications is another bit, particularly for those who are injecting drugs as well on an ongoing basis. So wrapping that around from an infrastructure perspective is crucially important to us. Complex Size is one of those vehicles in which we're going to do that. In the plan, then we've also got an opportunity to roll that out further across outside of Belfast as and when funds become available to that. But ultimately, it's about meeting the person where they're at and wrapping around them. Because if you ask anybody who's addicted to a substance, no one wakes up in the morning saying they want to be addicted. They find themselves there for various different reasons, and so having that really person-centred, compassionate approach is key. And actually, those services and the individuals in particular are doing that on a day and daily basis and meeting those needs, and also developing within that cohort almost a peer element where people who have come through that process, who are a bit more stable, are able to actually engage through services like the needle exchange that we provide across the region as well.
And I suppose just building on that and around that, so we are represented through the interdepartmental homelessness group that DFC lead on. They're represented in our group, so there is those connections between at the strategic level. I presented recently to some of that group, and there's some challenges around that as well, and that's great, and to look at those issues. So there's the strategic connection, and certainly when there are issues arise, and I'm thinking recent issues that maybe arose, there's conversations both between the PHA and the housing executive and between the departments in terms of how do we look at some of those issues, what's the impact spillovers, and how do we try best to mitigate some of the harms that come from some of those situations without going into huge detail.
Yeah. I mean, you'll be aware of Welcome Organisation and the challenges that are there, so that's caused a big issue for providing the right service at the right time for people who are experiencing homelessness, and that's also connected to the Belfast Health Inclusion Service as well. So trying to find a home for those two services again is a high priority for a range of agencies that are coming together in the city centre area, really supported by council, I have to say as well, who are taking a lead role in making sure that we can find the right premises to put those services into so that the service can be provided, and that's also going to connect to. You mentioned the link earlier about justice, the MICE process there for the multi-agency triage for those who find themselves in a vulnerable position. It's been led by PSNI. That's a core linkage into that service as well. So people are being captured by multiple interfaces, and I suppose we're trying to get the service wherever that interface is to meet the person where they're at and provide the right service for them.
Did you want to come back on that before we move on to dual diagnosis?
Go ahead.
Dual diagnosis, yeah, and I'll ask Julie maybe to come in on that in a second. I think one of the things I would say at the start is in our substance use services, I would say 85-90% of those people do have mental health issues and are in the service. So I think sometimes people think it's a complete barrier, and there are issues and there are interface issues, and there is no doubt about that. But actually, if we didn't deal with people who had dual diagnosis, there would be a lot more space within our services, and the demand would be there, because it is a major cohort. And as we've seen substance use change over time in Northern Ireland, that intensity of support that's required has really changed. You don't see massive changes in young people drinking, young people using drugs. Those are relatively stable, maybe actually falling, but actually it's the harm people are coming to is up because of those issues like polysubstance use, co-occurring mental health issues and all. Julie, I don't know if you want to just say a wee bit about what we're doing.
Yeah, and earlier I think the point that you made is well made in terms of the culture. This is a cultural leviathan that we're going to have to turn around, and I think when we see scarcity in terms of resources, people often retreat to their silos, and that is one of the difficulties that we see day and daily. But in terms of putting the plan together, we had a very extensive cross-agency, specialism group to look at some of the real challenges, and we have that together. We have now set up a task and finish group, which actually meets on Monday, and Kevin's co-chair of that, which will be looking at some of those real challenges around how we move people out of their silos, how we look at the workforce, and making sure that people feel confident on both sides, that they're well trained, but also every contact counts. I mean, we talk about that, and it's easy to say, but I think it's hard to do. And we are very minded, and our vision is that cultural piece, that it's everybody's business. is the way that we want to tackle that. So we have got our ongoing task and finish group, which starts on Monday. We will also have a worker who will be employed with an SPPG specifically to look at those kind of QI, the quality improvement aspects of this, in terms of how we get our services more interlinked. And really interestingly, we just launched the Western Needs Assessment piece of work that was that we had undertaken, just looking at the needs of the population around substance use. And what we found from that is there's actually a plethora of services, but they're not always linked well together. So our task is looking at the services that we have, breaking down those barriers, getting that culture. You know, this is for everybody. We need to have a collective vision, and then work on how we start to do that on a kind of day and daily basis in terms of, you know, operating procedures and all of that.
I think the other opportunity for us now is the setting up of the single mental health service and the collaborative board, and how do we cut co-occurring across all of the networks, because I don't think it can be a standalone network. It is actually touches on all those pieces, so there's a bit of work on us to advocate for that and make it happen, but also then this worker potentially could do some of that linking work across all those groups, so there's a real opportunity for us there.
Yeah, no, I actually had that point wrote down as well, Gary, and just to finish, because it's even the regional mental health service, but the crisis service.
Yes.
I mean, that is where you're going to get plenty of dual diagnosis, plenty of people battling with mental health problems and addiction problems. And just to say, I do think that from the Minister's being in post, just to be fair, that he has gave a lot of time, as have yourselves, to those with lived experience and the families that have been bereaved. And next Friday the Minister is also coming out to join me to visit the People's Kitchen and to actually come and face to face and speak with people, these people who are actually battling at the worst point in their lives with addiction and homeless. So fair play to him, because all that's part of breaking down the stigma in terms of how we treat people with these issues. So thanks very much.
Just in terms of the MDT stuff, sorry, your last question.
Yeah.
I mean, I think we're actively having conversations about how we can best link into that, and I think when we approached them, it was a welcome approach actually, and they're really keen to think about how GPs and MDTs can really help us across the piece from prevention right through to recovery, and actually where's the space for them in that. Now, we're early days in those conversations. I think some areas are probably slightly ahead because of some work they've done with GP federations, etc. But I think for us there's a real opportunity there as that rolls out, to thinking about how do we mainstream some of this before people get to the point of needing addiction services, but actually how do we manage people in the community and stop them getting to those crisis points. So there's a real opportunity there, but conversations are early days.
Yeah.
Brilliant, thank you so much.
Okay. Danny?
Thank you. Quite a few of the questions have been answered and raised there by Orlea, but there's so many questions around this. It's such a serious issue. It's huge. We have higher levels of trauma. We know we have higher levels of trauma in Northern Ireland than the rest of the UK. We also, I think, 25% higher levels of anxiety and depression in children here in Northern Ireland than we do in the rest of the UK, which is a absolutely shocking number. We also have higher levels of prescription medications than anywhere else in the UK, so we have an established sort of high prescription culture. Could you tell me what we're doing? Is there anything in particular you're doing to address that? What do you think the reasons are, and what you're doing to address that? Yeah,
so I mean, I think that's a really interesting issue, and I think Northern Ireland possibly over time has been a slight outlier in terms of prescription drug misuse. And if it had taken us back 10 years, I probably would have said it was the main issue we were facing. Actually, and if you looked at our deaths, benzodiazepines were probably the highest substance on any death certificate, and certainly, you know, you can see higher rates of prescribing in certain areas. I think, and when you look at the evidence, prescribing rates match really closely to deprivation rates, and they map really closely to areas where there's leftover trauma from the Troubles, or there is still a peace infrastructure. So the closer you get to a peace wall, the more likely you are to have a prescription. Long and short of it, there is research that absolutely demonstrates that. I think that's created two things. One, for a period of time, prescription drug misuse was an acceptable form of substance use in Northern Ireland, when perhaps the likes of heroin or whatever wasn't seen as acceptable within our communities because of lots of reasons, and we didn't see that, and there was obviously maybe harder to get supply of those substances, and so over time people people's normalisation of the taking of a pill, a tablet, a whatever is definitely there. So there's definitely a legacy of that. I would say though, if you now look at England, Scotland, and Scotland in particular, the benzodiazepine issue is absolutely alive and well in Scotland as well, and there is a clear market for synthetic benzodiazepines and pregabalin as well. Sorry, I should mention as being the other real key in that. I think so. I think there's different aspects of what we're doing about it. I think one, not us because it's different colleagues in SPPG are looking at what prescribing rates are like in GP practices. Are they within the norm for their need? That's really complicated work because it's hard to say who doesn't need a prescription, who does need a prescription, but there's pieces of work to look at that and to try and think about how we manage those prescription bits. Then there is work looking at the supply of illicit medicines, be those counterfeit, be those diverted, be those whatever, as well. So there'll be a specific piece of work in the plan looking at prescription drug misuse and how we address that. I think we're really well in that space because our services have seen it for so long that actually they are used to doing that. I think the real challenge on the horizon has been the introduction of synthetic benzodiazepines, and they pose a real risk, particularly in polydrug use circumstances where they can be a lot stronger, their effects different. They might not present in an overdose situation the way they did previously, and people may actually think they're opioid overdoses and things like that. So I think we're very conscious of that. We're very much looking at what work Scotland are doing because it's such an issue in Scotland, and trying to learn from that as well. Kevin or Julie, I don't know if you want to add something from...
Maybe just connected to not necessarily prescription, but the other element of that is over-the-counter medication. So there is ongoing work as well around ensuring that there's a programme jointly led by PHA and SPPG to target community pharmacies. So there's development of a patient information leaflet, there's a training package for pharmacies, and then there's also a animation, I think is what we're calling it, that can go up into local pharmacies, and most of them have like the flat screen TVs there and things like that, and billboards where they can be seen. And again, it's just raising awareness. It's that idea of psychoeducation and really getting people to stop and ask, well, do I actually need this pill? Is this pain I'm feeling, is this other thing that I'm feeling is going to be resolved by using a pill or not, be that over the counter or be that through a prescription, and it's really just getting people to stop and think about that, and also wrapping around the support of the community pharmacists there as well.
That sort of leads me into my second question, just about accessibility of drugs. Now I noticed, I think it's pillar A, relates to reducing the supply and accessibility of drugs. I find that a huge challenge, and certainly I know my own constituency. I know there have been increase in drug supply in the area, and from what I hear right across Northern Ireland as well. I don't see this reducing, and I appreciate the efforts of the police, but I don't see this being reduced. I think there's such a market for it that we are always going to have to deal with this. I see one of the actions was to work with the UK government to ensure the Misuse of Drugs Act was working as intended in Northern Ireland. Could you tell me a bit about how you think that's working?
Yeah, so I mean, the Advisory Council on the Misuse of Drugs is a body that was set up under the Misuse of Drugs Act to advise all the UK ministers, whoever that happens to be, because in different governments, those are different ministers responsible for drugs. So, for example, it sits in the Home Office in England, etc. So in different places. So we now are standing members of that and can seek advice from the Advisory Council and also feed in our information in terms of what the Northern Ireland situation is. So, for example, they were doing a recent report on cocaine, and it was a really useful opportunity actually for us to feed in about the increases of injecting cocaine we're seeing in Belfast that they're not necessarily seeing in bits of England. They are now starting to see in Scotland as well, and to think about how that takes account of it. And I think there's a general thing there about working collectively across all the governments, north and south actually, about how we think we join up on these enforcement issues. I think you're right, reducing the supply of drugs is going to be a real challenge. Part of that is reducing supply, part of it's trying to reduce demand as well within the population, and reduce people seeking the substances, and that will continue. But from our point of view, certainly we will continue to feed into the Advisory Council on Misuse of Drugs or our 4 nation groups via the British Irish Council, etc., to say these are specific Northern Irish needs and these need to be taken account of as part of the process. And we'll see how the new government in England obviously takes that forward and thinking about how they position themselves in the drug market. So we'll continue to watch those developments. But certainly I sense there is a greater willingness across the piece to reach out to all the devolved administrations, take account of their needs and try and feed that evidence into the system as well.
Thank you. Just one last question. Just with the amount of deaths that we've had for injectable overdoses, which are preventable, for the most part purely preventable, has there been, I know we've had an expansion of the naloxone distribution system, which I think is fantastic, and the more we get of that out on the streets, the better and the more lives that we save. Has there been any thought to progressing an overdose prevention centre, well, probably in Belfast? Has that been progressed at all?
So the strategy doesn't contain an action about an overdose prevention centre specifically, and I suppose at the time the strategy was developed, and still the position is that it's not actually allowed by the UK Misuse of Drugs Act, and it currently does not allow for that. Interestingly, there's been a position that the Advocate General in Scotland has allowed a dispensation for a pilot, and it's specifically for a pilot in a specific area in Scotland, and they are in the process of setting that up. We sort of anticipated it would be up and running by now, but there are always issues with these things and getting it into place. And actually at the same time, our colleagues in the Republic of Ireland are also in the process of piloting a system. There are two differing approaches being taken across the two, one being much more clinically led and one being much more community and voluntary sector led. And I think what the position we are taking is we're going to look at those two to see what the outcomes is. You know, there's real UK, Ireland examples of how effective these will be in our cultural circumstances, because we are different culturally than America or Switzerland or Australia. So I think we'll be looking at the evidence really closely and then making a case as to whether or not we think we need something similar in Northern Ireland based on that. I think just one of the other challenges is, going forward, budgets are incredibly tight. So I think what we have to do against the commissioning plan of any service is say, where is that additional money we get, if we get additional money, best spent? And it may well be that an overdose prevention centre could be where that's best spent if we get the evidence through from Scotland and Ireland. Or do we invest more in prevention services, or do we invest more in our treatment and support services? So there's those conversations about it will cost additional sums, and the model will really depend, because there's a huge price difference between which model you go down in terms of their, you know, so is it affordable? And if it is affordable, where would that sit? But I think the first piece is really seeing what the evidence of local examples will be of delivery. And I think the other thing is, I think we're in a different place stigma-wise than Scotland and Ireland, and I think we need to bear that into consideration as to where you would put a centre if we were to put one in place. And I'm thinking of the example of the Welcome Centre. We need to think about putting it somewhere that everybody is safe, and that would be a key consideration as well, because I think there are more nuances perhaps in our culture here than maybe Scotland or Ireland would have to deal with.
I know the worldwide evidence for these centres is huge, and the lives they save is phenomenal. From, you know, overdoses are preventable when they're medically managed. So, you know, it's a very, very good idea.
And maybe one thing just to add to that as well, just on the context piece, that actually those other services in those other countries, they have a very high population of injecting drug users. Our population of injecting drug users in Northern Ireland is relatively small in comparison, and actually our population has a bigger cohort who will use polysubstance use, so pills and also powders like cocaine and other benzodiazepines. So there would need to be that element of how do we cater for the right cohort of people coming through, and is it more than just an overdose prevention centre? Is it a safer injecting site, for example, or is it something different? And the evidence is slightly different depending on which service you would look at, international evidence base for it.
Thank you very much.
I have two more members, and just remind people it's almost 4:30 and we've another briefing, so do you want to still come in?
Well,
I left Colin and then you thought you were saying no. Sorry.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you for the presentation. Look, I'll be very quick. There are just 2 points. Number one is that we can see that at the final stage of Tier 4, and that there is about inpatient services and about the importance of keeping them. I can literally look out of my living room window and see Ward 15, and the importance of that certainly within our community, but for those that use the services, and the sort of changes that there are in terms of staffing, the pressures that there are in terms of staffing to be able to maintain them. Is there a part of what you're doing considering a review of how things are staffed, so that we don't leave ourselves in that situation where one member of staff exits, then a whole service is in danger, and is there a way of fixing that? And then just the other point is about the dual diagnosis, about probably one of the more traumatic cases that I'm dealing with is just a young person who, you know, is in that vicious circle of mental health issues, gets them sorted out, then gets their benefits twice a week, big amount of money that goes straight to them, that they then go straight out and use on drugs, and then they end up in a bad way, and then they end up, and it just seems like they go round and round and round in circles. And the case that I've been helping there has been going for years, and the family are at their wits' end of trying to provide that support. So is there a way that we can finally crack that in maybe even a particular service, if there's really extreme cases, that we can direct people into? Because, you know, I know the family are, and I share with them the difficulty that they're just waiting on a particular news coming through at some stage, and that's what they don't want to face.
In terms of Tier 4, I'll pass to Julie in a wee second, but I suppose we recognise its importance within the system. But I think you touch on a wider point that's really important, which is workforce across all of the tiers. And I think it's really important that we are connected into the mental health workforce review, because this is a specialism really within mental health services, and addiction psychiatrists are a specialism within psychiatry. So we need to increase both of those to, you know, we'll not increase addiction psychiatry on its own. We actually need to increase the psychiatry roles and then addiction psychiatry within that. So I want to reassure you that we're linked into those conversations on workforce and the mental health, and that's really, really helpful. Julie, do you want to say anything on the Tier 4?
Yeah, so I mean, on your point, I mean, you'll be pleased to know that we have kept Ward 15 open, but there are real constraints within that around the workforce. But one of the things that the Tier 4 review has looked at is the MDT approach within each of the wards as well. So not just being wholly reliant on the consultant-led role. So that Tier 4 review, when that comes out for public consultation on the 26th or thereabouts, will be really helpful to look at that. But I think, as Gary has highlighted, that is a real issue with psychiatry. Within addictions, we have had recently 3 psychiatrists who have handed in their notice and have left the service. And for such a small service, relatively, that's a huge impact. And we are struggling to recruit. So that, as Gary says, will be something that will be looked at in its wider sense. In terms of the Tier 4, people want to know a bit more about that, or, I mean, that's essentially looking at inpatient detox, but also our residential rehab services as well. And that's been a very in-depth piece of work, looking at our current system, but also looking at what works elsewhere and looking at our demand in terms of the population. So again, that will report at the 26th in terms of looking at the recommendations there. But certainly what we would be envisaging from that is a recovery network, which looks at your community detox aspect right through to the other end. Once you've gone through treatment, how you are supported in a very assertive way post-recovery, with the understanding that addiction is a relapsable condition. So the line is always wavy, it's never a straight path. So how do those people get supported all along the way? Which leads on to your next point, because you know that assertive outreach part seems to be the way people will falter. It's how we as a system pick those people up again and remind them that there is hope. And I think that's what we're very clear at in terms of our vision, that we need enough services to keep that hope alive for individuals, so the family don't get to that point of ultimate despair of this is never going to change. There's always hope it will change, but we need our services to be assertive enough to help with that.
And I think the other point, and Arlene mentioned earlier, is we need to make sure that the crisis service, the regional crisis service, is responsive to those who appear intoxicated. And I'm going to put it as wide as that, because it might not be a substance use issue as part of the crisis, but often a crisis will involve substance use. And it's important that those people aren't ruled out and they are also followed up in whatever that is. So we'll continue to work with our colleagues to make sure that's the case. I think those individual circumstances are always really, really challenging and difficult, and I think we recognise that. And I think a nature of this issue is, as Julie says, it can be a relapsing issue, and that recovery bit is something I think we acknowledge we haven't done enough of in the past. And actually, if we're going to sustain change for individuals and really give them hope, that recovery piece is a really essential bit going forward.
And probably just to add on to that, substance misuse liaison nursing is something that we're focusing on as well. So people who are coming to ED, we've talked with families about how painful that is. People who are coming into ED who are then going back out again and they're back in again after they've overdosed. How do we get those people supported at that right time in the right place? So we are working with South Eastern Trust colleagues looking at really scoping what our current provision is, looking at all of the data that we have and looking at best models of practice in terms of what that looks like within our ED services as well, to try and break some of that cycle that we've talked about.
The other element I would add to that as well is not just the individual who's experiencing that issue, but the family are. And I suppose one of the things we're looking at now that we're going to imminently commission is part of our Adult Step 2 services, which has a wraparound support for families. So their families can be in part of that support as a treatment partner for that individual you're referencing, but they can also get support in their own right, because even after that person potentially goes through and into recovery, the family are still left for some of the things that have happened during that traumatic process, so and might need their own. So certainly can link in afterwards, kind of around localised support around that.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Okay, and Nuala.
Yeah, thank you very much. I will ask a quick question. It was just, you know, addiction is it's a societal problem, and there are many issues like poverty that lead people to addiction, mental health that has been explored a lot here today. In my role, I also sit in the policing board, and this morning we had our committee meeting, and one of the elements of that this month was around drugs, seizures, and what the police are doing to tackle that. And we are seeing a lot of drugs that are taken off the streets, but it's constant. It's going to be always going to be a battle. It's not just a policing issue. It shouldn't just be a policing fight. And often it results in criminality for people who it is not their fault. I know that the police are trying to take different turns to actually help manage it in a different way, but what is the department doing to actually work with the police service and with the department for communities, just in terms of putting that pressure on to ensure that there is a health approach and an approach to tackle poverty, but also to take the criminal. Yes, I'm not talking about changing the law in terms of the criminal aspects of it, but I'm talking about not turning the person into criminal, but actually helping. So can you talk a bit about your work with the police and with the Department for Communities?
Yeah, no, we work really closely with the police colleagues, primarily through the Organised Crime Task Force as our linking point for that. And there is lots of activity and joint messaging that goes out collectively from us. And I think we, as that task force, recognise collectively that, you know, we won't just seize our way out of the problem, but actually it can be part of the solution in times that can remove particularly dangerous drugs off the street, and it actually allows us to understand sometimes what substances are actually circulating in Northern Ireland and to put out harm reduction messages around those particular circumstances. So certainly we do link up in a lot of their activity, and if they're undertaking activity, we try to align with ourselves in terms of where we're going. Certainly, you know, from our point of view, we are keen, particularly for those offences, you know, to see what alternatives are there for those and to link them in through things like substance misuse court, as I mentioned earlier, or different disposal options, because we know if your crime is committed primarily around substance use, prison might not be the best place for you in terms of dealing with that issue or that trauma in the longer term, and how can we link those people back in to our services. Where we go, and I think, you know, we link well with the Department Community in terms of the anti-poverty strategy. I think the overlap between poor health outcomes and poverty is a almost completely circled Venn diagram. If you look at the you know, where you know there's almost no gaps there at all in terms of where there is poverty, you will have poor health outcomes and health inequalities. So not just for substance use, but actually across the piece, we're reaching out to our colleagues who are in the development of the new anti-poverty strategy, how that can be supportive of our wider health work. Particularly focusing on inequalities and how we might target and focus some of that more on those at most need, where there are the biggest inequalities, because we also know health inequalities drive poverty, because those are the people who can't engage in the workforce, who can't take those opportunities. So there is a vicious cycle. I mean, if you look at healthy life expectancy, you know, it's 58 or something for men in the most deprived communities. That's clearly working age. That is folks who cannot work because they are unhealthy. That's bad for their health because they're not working, because good health's good for your work, but it's also bad for our economy in Northern Ireland. So there is lots of connections there in terms of working closely together across the piece. But we have really good working relationships with the PSNI in particular. You know, we are really well linked in. We get intelligence reports that inform our harm reduction outputs. We have systems where we can test substances of particular concern. So we are well connected there, and we can always do more, and we'll always try and do more and build those connections. But obviously some of the things about disposal options, we can obviously make our case, but those decisions are made, elsewhere in terms of actually how that goes and within line of court guidance and
It
stuff.
also includes the forensic service for Northern Ireland as well in that space, and that information is really key, because then we use that for our DOMIS alerts to send out to our community voluntary statutory organisations with harm reduction information, advice and guidance, so they know what's happening in local communities. A real practical example of how police and health work together operationally is the collection and operation of the rapid bins. So rapid bins, members may be aware, exist right across the communities, largely in community organisations or in shopping centres and things like your Tesco's and Asda and things like that, where people can go in and just dispose of any type of medication, any type of drug in that, and police and our Commission Connection Service work together to lift that, to take those drugs out of the community in a rapid way. So that's another practical example that often doesn't hit the headlines but happens on a day and daily basis right across the province.
Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you all. Again, I think it's been very, very helpful, and there's probably other things coming out, but as we go along, I know the framework is next week, the 26th, isn't it? Yeah, so I'm sure members will be in attendance at that as well. But appreciate your time, so thanks very much.
Thank you.
Okay, members, again, we're really, really over time here, so I'll do my best. I just want to check, does anyone need to leave anytime soon?
I'll not be able to stay much longer after 5,
That's
sorry.
okay. Well, hopefully we'll. So it's just we need to keep a wee eye on quorum, so if we can keep we'll keep that, we'll move as quickly as we can then. Our next briefing then is on the Westminster Tobacco and Vapes Bill. If I could refer you to papers at tab 7 of your pack, which include the departmental press release, the bill as introduced on the 5th of November 24, committee's report on an LCM from April 24 when we first discussed this, clerk's memo at page 3 of table papers, the department's briefing paper at page 5 of table papers, a copy of correspondence from JTI UK to the Minister at page 42 of table papers, and a Cancer Research UK briefing paper at page 49 of your table papers. Hello, how are you? You're all very welcome, and again apologies for the delay. We've had a heavy agenda today and we've overrun on someone, so we do appreciate your patience. And you're very welcome back on this issue. So in attendance today we have Professor Sir Michael McBride, the Chief Medical Officer, Siobhan Broderick, Director of Population Health, and Leslie Heaney, Population Health Directorate. We have limited time at this stage, but I will open up to yourselves for opening remarks, and then we'll have some questions from members.
Well, Chair, delighted to be back. I shall keep my comments brief because you're under time pressure, but as you quite rightly say, I had the opportunity to meet with you back on the 14th of March, and as you subsequently know, then we had legislative consent motion was agreed by the executive on the 21st of March, but unfortunately the legislation fell with the dissolution of Parliament and the general election. The new bill has been introduced on the 5th of November. I'm just going to outline a few brief comments about why I still feel the bill is crucially important, notwithstanding the fact I've explained some of these issues in greater detail the last time we met. And then I'm going to hand over to Siobhan, who will take you through some of the key differences in the new bill and also how our approach compares to the Republic of Ireland. I suppose the most important statement to start with is that smoking kills. It does and remain the most preventable cause of death, disability and ill health in the UK, and it kills over 2,000 people here in Northern Ireland each and every single year. The effects, as you know, are wide-ranging, increasing the risk of more than 50 serious health conditions, which I outlined in detail when I was last here. And research has shown that, on average, those killed from smoking have lost 10 to 15 years of their life. It's absolutely critical that we understand the human consequences contained within those statistics. However, the impact of smoking between those areas with the highest levels of deprivation in society compared with the least deprived is stark. Smoking rates in the least deprived are 3 times the rate in the smoking rates in these areas where deprivation is highest are 3 times in the least deprived areas. Lung cancer rate in these areas is 2.5 times higher, and smoking death rate is twice as high. And when a person starts smoking is crucially important. Studies have shown that among adult smokers, about 2/3 report that they took up smoking before the age of 18 and over 80% before they were 20. And we know that children of parents who smoke are about 3 times more likely to start smoking themselves. These numbers, and of which there are many more, are much more than numbers you know. As you know, there's the real human impact of smoking. This is compounded further by the impact in terms of the cost to our already stretched health service. In 1920, Northern Ireland Hospital spent £218 million treating smoking-related conditions. The same year, there were 38,617 smoking attributable hospital admissions. And in Northern Ireland, the British Heart Foundation recently estimated that the cost of tobacco to society here is 400 million annually. And every single penny that we spend dealing with tobacco-related harms is entirely avoidable and represents a huge opportunity cost to our health service and financial cost to taxpayers. So the facts are clear. We must act to address the harms that smoking causes, harms which are entirely preventable. But as we discussed last time, it's not just tobacco we must consider. We've seen significant rises in the prevalence of vaping, both nicotine and non-nicotine based. And particular concern is the increase among young people. Recent data shows that 1/5 of young people have used an e-cigarette at least once. And if we look at the use currently in year 12, it is particularly concerning and has grown, almost doubled from 2019, rising from 11.7% to 23.6%. We don't know the long-term harms, but the Institute of Public Health in Ireland, of which I know you previously took evidence from, did undertake a rapid review of the evidence on behalf of the department, and it found a high-quality evidence of an association between e-cigarette use and subsequent cigarette use supporting a gateway effect. It also found some evidence, although less conclusive, recommending long-term studies support the association between e-cigarette use, having asthma, increased coughing, marijuana use, alcohol use, and mental ill health. There are also health risks associated with other ingredients in the vapes, again, which I outlined previously. In the interest of time, I'll not expand further. The long-term health harms of inhaling colours and flavours are known, but are certainly very unlikely to be beneficial. And there are growing concerns about social and educational harms of vaping with increasing numbers of post-primary school children. All of this substantiates our view and my view and advice to CMO that robust measures are required to address the appeal of these products. In closing, I believe this bill provides us with a unique opportunity to save lives, creating a smoke-free generation, gradually ending the sale of tobacco products and breaking the cycle of addiction and disadvantage. There is absolutely no safe level of tobacco consumption, none, and the prevalence of vaping, especially among young children, young people, is ever growing with unknown long-term effects. Chair, Deputy Chair, members, I respectfully urge you to grasp this opportunity and exercise our collective responsibility to take meaningful action and prevent those who are vulnerable from the effects of this life-limiting addiction. Earlier this year, you provided your support for similar measures. I thank you all for that. I sincerely hope you join us again today in supporting this bill. I'm now going to hand over to Siobhan.
Thank you, and thank you for the opportunity to come and speak to you this afternoon. As Michael has said, I will take a few minutes to highlight the key changes from the previous bill you all considered earlier this year and how our approach compares to the Republic to the South. The bill's aim remains the creation of a smoke-free generation. As such, the provisions in the new bill are broadly in line with the previous version. Consequently, the bill makes it an offence to sell tobacco products, herbal smoking products and cigarette papers to anyone born on or after the 1st of January 2009. It provides measures to regulate vaping products, that's both nicotine and non-nicotine vapes, including age of sale, product requirements, displays, flavours and notification requirements. In terms of what is different from the previous version, which members considered earlier this year, the key changes are a number of the previous provisions relating to a ban on free distribution of vapes and nicotine products and sale of non-nicotine vapes to those under 18 years old were previously dealt with through regulation making powers. They're now on the face of the legislation, so they're on the face of the bill. That's in part 3, if you want, and I can provide you the clauses if you want. The bill also extends the tobacco vending machine ban to include cigarette papers, vapes and other nicotine products. That's new. The bill will extend the tobacco retailers register to include vapes and other nicotine products, and that's again in Part 3. The bill will introduce a retail licensing provisions that will be commenced in the longer term following consultation. There are wider powers to allow for more significant changes to the tobacco and vapes notification scheme, and that's under Part 5 of the bill. The bill extends the existing robust tobacco advertising rules to cigarette papers, herbal smoking products, vaping products and other nicotine products, and that's in Part 6 of the bill. The bill powers will allow regulations to be made to extend smoke-free provisions in relation to public outdoor places or workplaces, and to allow for regulations making smoke-free places also vape-free places, and also heated tobacco-free places, and that's in Part 7 of the bill. So I might just look at some of those new provisions. So in relation to additional smoke-free places, in terms of those, members will be aware that these new provisions attracted some attention in the media over the summer. Specifically, the bill provides the Department with powers for additional places to be made smoke-free, specifying that they must be workplace or open to the public, which can include outdoor spaces, obviously. Such spaces may only be prescribed smoke-free places during the times they are open to the public or used as a place of work. The bill also provides powers designating places or vehicles to be vape-free and or heated tobacco-free, but only when they are already smoke-free. When announcing the bill, the UK Government clarified that it is not their intention to extend smoke-free places in England to the hospitality sector. Rather, it is considering plans to designate places such as children's playgrounds, outside schools and hospitals as smoke-free. In terms of here in Northern Ireland, any regulations will be subject to consultation and will be subject to the draft affirmative resolution procedure. As such, I wish to assure members that the appropriate mechanisms will be put in place to ensure scrutiny of any proposed regulations in relation to this matter. In respect of licensing, again a new part of the provisions that are provided in the bill. In terms of licensing and registration in Northern Ireland, I just want to clarify that in the first instance, the bill extends our existing retail register to include vapes and other nicotine products, and I think that was an issue that the committee discussed last time we were here. The bill also provides powers to introduce a future licensing scheme which will cover tobacco products, other smoking products, nicotine products and vapes. The bill does set out the broad shape of the licensing scheme, criminal penalties and financial penalties, but details will be brought forward through regulations. So it just provides the framework and then the detail will be in the regulations. This will allow time for a considered approach to be taken with appropriate consultation before introducing a new licensing scheme. While Northern Ireland's current tobacco retailers register is a helpful enforcement tool, it has limitations, and I think you might have touched upon those last time. So introducing a licensing scheme will allow us to strengthen the enforcement, supporting legitimate businesses, and will act as a deterrent to rogue retailers, which in turn will support the Department's strategic aim of improving public health. So I might then turn to the other issue that members may want some information on, which is how we compare North and South. We share a common goal of reducing smoking prevalence and reducing the level of tobacco harm. This aligns with the aims of the World Health Organization and the EU. The EU goal is defined as less than 5% of the population using tobacco by 2040. We engage regularly with colleagues in Dublin and met with them only last week to update them on the bill and to hear in turn about the Public Health Tobacco Amendment Bill 2024, which is known as Tobacco 21 or T21. So Tobacco 21 aims to accelerate the decline in adult smoking prevalence, which had plateaued at 18% in the South. So it is one of a series of measures designed to reduce smoking prevalence among children to zero. The bill is currently before the Oireachtas and completed Shannon Aaron 5th stage on the 7th of November, and is currently awaiting enactment and will make Ireland the first EU country to raise the minimum age of sale of tobacco products to 21. Tobacco 21 will not impact the minimum legal age of sale of nicotine inhaling products. So since December 2023, the sale of nicotine inhaling products, including vapes, to under 18s has been banned in the South, and you know that was introduced earlier here. So there's currently no proposal to extend that to the age of 21. So how do we align? Adoption of Tobacco 21 in Ireland will create a cross-border divergence. However, in time it will still mean that no one on the island of Ireland under the age of 21 will be able to legally buy cigarettes. Both Tobacco 21 and smoke-free generation measures aim to achieve the same end, acting on the same population group, the young, over the same period to protect children and young people from ever becoming addicted. So beyond the age of 21, the chances of becoming, I'm not quite sure what I'm competing with, beyond the age of 21, the chances of becoming a regular smoker are significantly reduced. As the CMO already mentioned, the statistics are quite stark that it's if you're over 80% of smokers start before they're 20. Cross-border divergence is not unusual in this area. Until recently, the age of sale for nicotine vapes, I think I mentioned this, was restricted to 18 in the north, but now it's not that in the south. It just recently became that in the south. And other measures have been introduced at different times. In both jurisdictions, the introduction of new laws and legal age of sale are likely to drive more vigilance and age verification. In terms of enforcement, the Institute of Public Health in Ireland, and I think you heard from them last time, concluded that the potential disruption in enforcement occasioned by different legislative approaches is minor and should be considered carefully in the context of the known negative impacts of delaying legislation aimed at reducing the use of tobacco. And the CMO has already mentioned the dire impact that tobacco has on lives. So doing nothing is the worst option. The tobacco industry has lobbied intensively against a number of progressive tobacco control measures by raising fears of black market and criminal activity. IPH has advised that evaluations of the impact of tobacco control measures repeatedly conclude that they do not contribute to increasing rates of out-of-country purchases, illicit tobacco, or cross-border purchases of tobacco products. Despite different legislation in the south and the north, the resulting increased vigilance and restrictions will benefit us all. So one last issue I might touch upon is that I understand JTI has shared with members a letter that they sent to the First Minister and Deputy First Minister, raising concerns that the generational age of sale provisions are not consistent with the EU provisions that apply to Northern Ireland via the Windsor Framework. As noted in our paper that we shared with you, the committee, consideration of this issue is a matter for the UK Government, but the UK Government's advice is that the provisions in the bill are consistent with the Windsor Framework. I may also mention in this context that the UK Government and the EU are parties to the World Health Organization Framework Convention on Tobacco Control, which aims to encourage every country to take steps to protect its citizens from the harm caused by tobacco. There is guidance provided to public health bodies under the auspices of WHO and that convention. That says the fundamental and irreconcilable conflict between the tobacco industry's interests and public health policy interests. It says that we should seek to protect the formulation and implementation of public health policies from the tobacco industry. Consequently, there are limitations in how we engage with the tobacco industry to ensure accountability and transparency. So in conclusion, I'd like to thank the members for their time today, and I know we're open to any questions.
Thank you. And I mean, a lot of probably what I was going to ask you've covered, Siobhan, so that's very useful. I suppose just the only question I really have is in relation to the North-South engagement and implementation, and you've covered around the tobacco products. As part of those discussions, has there been anything in relation to banning single-use vapes? I know we were obviously heading that direction in the north, but in terms of the south, have they any plans around that you're aware of?
I think they are planning to ban single-use vapes, and as you know, DARE is leading that proposal in Northern Ireland with a date, I think, of the ban coming into effect next June.
Yeah.
Okay, and obviously conscious they're in an election at the minute, and you know things could change, but at least that's good that it's part of their plan anyhow.
I think they issued a sort of structure framework of the proposals in respect of nicotine vapes, and I think it was in that, but I can check for you.
Okay, no problem. Thank you. Danny?
Thank you. Yes, and thank you very much for that presentation. I really appreciate how powerful this bill will be, and it will change lives and save lives. So thank you. A couple of quick questions. Just the new regulation of vapes that is associated with this bill, will that mean that vapes are being sold behind in a cupboard in the same way that tobacco is? So we will actually, because what we see now when we go into a shop is mountains of vapes, brightly coloured packages, that'll be taken back and put behind doors.
Yeah, yes, happy for you doing that.
There's a power in the bill that provides the department to make regulations to make similar provision as that, similar to tobacco, so displays and pricing to address that issue.
Including nicotine and non-nicotine vapes.
Yeah.
I mean, they're deliberately marketed, as you say, bright colours, flavours, etc., to target them at children.
So that'll be taken back. The other thing was, you mentioned the tobacco industry lobbying very, very strongly on this. Is the tobacco industry, the vapes industry, is there the same people involved in this, and are the vapes industry now involved in lobbying as well?
That's my understanding, that there has been a move by the tobacco industry, I suspect, seeing the writing on the wall, to move into the vapes industry. I don't know all of the details of that, but I think that there's a broad overlap between the two.
Do you see lobbying for vapes and to keep vapes sort of unregulated?
I mean, I think, yes. I mean, I think that, I think the retail sector is very strongly supportive of the move to regulation that's, and indeed with licensing within the bill, and given the rogue traders that Siobhan described. There is absolutely no doubt, and certainly my own view has always been, whilst vapes are a useful tool for those who want to quit smoking and then stop vaping, that I was always concerned about the long-term gateway effect, and obviously the research evidence from the Institute of Public Health and that is very compelling in that respect. Promoting vapes, blatantly marketing vapes at children is basically an attempt to recruit children into a life-limiting addiction that's going to kill 2/3 of them. So I think that we clearly have to take action both on tobacco use in all its forms and also in vaping.
Thank you.
Thank you, Nuala.
I just wanted to ask if that would include the bollards that are outside, the advertising bollards that are outside that host the vapes.
The power should be wide enough to allow us to address that.
Yeah. Because that's what we see outside the shops now, and actually we are anecdotally, obviously, because we haven't carried out official surveys, but we are seeing them in close connection to schools. That they're being put out, and we have had instances where actually MLAs have confronted after watching shops sell them to children in school uniform, and you're seeing it on bollards where they're advertised. So if that would go away to even ban those too, I think that's important.
The other provision is the licensing provision, which allows sort of a framework within which you can set conditions, which may include, subject to consultation, limiting sort of the sale of vapes or tobacco in the vicinity of a geographical location, which may be a school.
I think that is worthwhile, it's something that anything that we can do, and also in terms of education awareness within schools, I think needs to be a part of, and I recognise that resources are an issue, but I think that needs to be a part of schools.
EHA did a bit of proactive work in that, engaging with colleagues, with both the health professionals and the education sector around awareness raising, and then put sort of fact sheets and the resources online, and they're shared across schools via SIA.
And just on that, picking up that, PHA also did a piece of work engaging with post-primary school children in Northern Ireland. Over 7,500 of them responded to an online survey and to group sessions. Basically 77% of them were saying it's the colours, it's the flavours, those are the things that are actually attracting us to use vapes. So young people themselves are telling us there's a problem here, and it's a problem we need to do something about, given the exponential growth we're seeing in their use.
We've heard from the Youth Assembly, the Northern Ireland Youth Assembly here, who shared similar views. So I think any powers to change that would be good. Yep.
Okay, Diane.
Just very quickly. Thank you for the issues around the licensing, because I think that is important and addresses a gap that was in the original proposals. Have you any projected data on the impact of banning the sale after 21 and the proposals in the bill?
I think there was modelling
There
done,
was,
Michael.
yeah. I
But
don't have it to hand.
I think IPHR are updating it at the moment because obviously the Tobacco 21 proposals may have a later start date. So there was some modelling done and we're getting that updated. I know you might want to hear from the IPHI again, but we can follow that up and share it with you.
Interesting to see that.
I can provide a written update on that if that would be helpful through the committee. But I absolutely strongly agree with you, and again it was an issue that you flagged last time we met about the limitations of the registration scheme and the importance of the licensing scheme, and I'm pleased to see that those provisions and those powers are within the new bill should the Assembly
That's the
wish
issue
to.
here. Yeah.
Okay. Look, thank you all for coming in. That's, again, even to be able to compare now the differences with the previous bill and this one has been very, very useful, so we appreciate your time.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks very much. Thanks.
Okay, members, so item number 8 then, we have the SL1, the Bread and Flour Amendment Regulations Northern Ireland 2024. If we could refer you to page 331 of your pack. The Department is proposing to make a statutory rule that will amend the Bread and Flour Regulations NI 1998, including to provide for the mandatory addition of folic acid to non-wholemeal flour to help reduce the number of neural tube defects affected pregnancies, and to introduce definitions of common wheat and wholemeal flour to clarify the scope of the regulations and ensure a consistent understanding across the bread and flour supply chain and local enforcement authorities. Change the required quantities of calcium carbonate, iron and niacin, and replace the criteria for the calcium carbonate specification to ensure consistency with other food legislation and to assist understanding and compliance. Provide exemptions for small mills to reduce regulatory burden for businesses where public health outcomes of the policy are not compromised. Provide for improvement notices, including the offence of failing to comply with an improvement notice, as an effective and proportionate approach to enforcement. Allow flour millers to place unfortified flour in the market subject to it being destined for countries outside the UK or used in products destined to be sold outside of the UK, and provide a transition period for businesses to adjust. The statutory rule will be subject to negative resolution procedure, and it is anticipated it will come into operation on the 13th of December 2024. Are members content with the merits of the policy and that the Department makes the statutory rule?
Yes.
Yep. Thank you. Item number 9 then is a written briefing on the update on hospital parking charges. If I could refer you to tab 9, which includes the clerk's memo, page 346, and the most recent update at page 348. If members have any comments.
Just is there an issue? I know I'd been contacted about an issue in the South Eastern Trust where they've increased the charges by 50%.
Yeah.
If it's in other places, like I know the general spirit of the Assembly was to try and provide free car parking. That had to be rebuffed, and we've been and done all of that. But I think that then raising it by 50% was a bit of a slap in the face for staff and for others that use it. Is there a way we could even just as a committee say, look, we know you're under pressure, but it just felt a bit bad taste after sort of trying to get free and then, okay, maintain the charges, okay, they're bad, but we have to maintain what's there. But then all of a sudden, just shortly after, they've doubled them in some instances.
This was previously raised.
Yes, I raised this.
And we did get a response to it from the Trust.
Got responses from the
Are they due in shortly, the Trusts?
Next week.
Could we put it down there, maybe?
I'm happy that we can put the response back in the next week's
Yeah,
papers,
and then we can
send it out to
on that.
members.
Yeah.
We outlined additional costs and a few other things, but I think we got responses from each of the trusts where the amounts were put up. So we'll make sure that's put in for next week.
I think also the issue was that they were put up quite significantly.
Yeah.
It wasn't just
like an extra 50.
and it was quite a significant
It was different
increase.
amounts in different.
Yeah.
I think.
But some trusts
Southeastern-
didn't do it at all.
Yeah, Southeastern went up a fair bit. Some of the others went up relatively small. So it was, but we did get a response on that, so I'll put that back into the pack for next week's meeting.
Okay, members. Item number 10 then is the committee's inquiry on access to palliative care. Just to refer you to tab 10 of your pack, we have a clerk's memo at page 384 and a list of stakeholders for the committee's call for evidence at page 385. If anyone has any comments to make in relation to that.
I met this morning with the new autism reviewer, and maybe just if it was possible to add maybe her onto that list of just people to link with, and I think maybe just opening them, there might be an opportunity later whenever we go into the thing that, because I visited a centre yesterday for those with learning difficulty or learning disabilities, and it's just end of life is very different for them than it is for most other people. Obviously the transition is hellish for people, but for those that have a learning disability and live in a residential setting, if they need to move to hospice type care, there might be a way of looking at how hospice care might come to them a bit better, and just maybe something that might be considered. But if that was possible, just to...
I think any setting where maybe someone is residential at that, you know, that's something that we should be looking at as well. So happy enough with that. Thank you. Item number 11 then is correspondence. Oh, sorry, Linda, I didn't see your hand up there.
Okay, just on the back of what Colin just said, I think that it would be valuable in terms of those who are providing care, particularly in the home around palliative care, that they have training around those with additional needs, whether that be autism or neurodiversional needs. I really think that we need to ensure that they have that training to understand what they're dealing with, because it is very, very different, obviously, in terms of what their needs might be and what the additional things that you might have to do to ensure that they're looked after and that they understand as well as they possibly can what is happening and why. I just think maybe we might need to look at that. So I think probably that the suggestion in terms of reaching out to the autism advocate is a good way of doing it, but it goes right across the spectrum. It's not just autism, obviously. So
yeah, no problem. Thank you for that, Linda. Yeah. Oh, I thought you were looking in. Sorry, Danny. Okay, then item number 11 is correspondence. Just to refer members to the correspondence list at tab 11.1, page 393 of your pack. If I could just highlight a number of items, so the members are if I could refer members to the department's response at page 663 regarding general dental services reform. If anyone has any comments, I mean, the BDS have written to all of us in terms of their real serious concerns in relation to the reform and where things are at in relation to that. I was going to suggest that we ask for regular updates on the progress of reform, because I do think it is critical. So I would say maybe every 2 to 3 months, preferably 2 months, that we're, you know, like similar to the hospital parking charges, that 8-week cycle, that we're getting regular updates if members are agreeable. Then I also can refer you to the department's response regarding health reform at page 665 if anyone has any comments in relation to that.
Hold on.
No. Okay.
I'm sorry, yes, no, I do. I'm just trying to get it, sorry.
Oh, right, okay, no worries.
I moved on, sorry. No, it was just probably a procedure question. The surgical hubs and the capacity issues. Do we know when they're coming back again? Because I think we need to explore this further with specifically around the surgical hubs, with the kind of people on the ground as a committee, with what the department are actually saying. So whenever they come back, I think it does need to be perhaps with I don't know if it should be an informal meeting or a briefing, but not to add on more to the agenda, but in just terms of the next time that they're coming back, if you could add it on.
Certainly, we've a briefing schedule at the minute for December on waiting lists. Now, we have had a conversation earlier about we're going to have a meeting down in Daisy Hill, and it might be worth trying to do something around elective care hubs when we're at that meeting. So
I don't mind that at all, Chair. But when you read that report, it doesn't tell you very much. If you don't understand the context of it, you'd be kind of going, what does that mean? Like, what does that actually mean? And how many hours do those weekly commissioned lists, how many hours does that contain? I'm going back to the Bengoa conference where I asked this question, and the response was something that these elective hubs should be like factories where we are producing and churning out operations day in and day out. I have no idea from that whether they're factories or not.
Yeah.
Or how many people?
Or how many
what,
people,
And the
or
other
what
thing,
percentage
wage.
of the waiting list does that contribute to? How?
Yeah,
it
we'd
gets
also asked
gobbledygook
around
to-
evenings and
to us.
weekends and the
Yes.
possibility of all
That's
of that.
much more. We'd also asked them to be quite simple in terms of their response, so as we can actually get a response. Like we asked, how many beds are you able to do? Are you offering the same procedure so that it can increase the actual volume of procedures? Because this is what we're hearing with evidence from the Royal Colleges with what actually
Yes.
can go on. So we want to know, is what the experts on their ground are saying this can be managed by turning it out quicker with what is able to be commissioned, and we can't make an evaluation unless we have that.
You could never make an evaluation on the information that's there.
No,
Or maybe
it's not clear. But yeah, if they're coming in December, I think we do need to.
Do you, like, put it back on the list then for us? Like, put this back on? Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you, members. And the other item is one that came in table papers this morning. Just if I could refer you to around the Transformation Fund and Primary Care MDTs programme at page 55 of your table papers. We have an informal session with the Director of Primary Care scheduled for Tuesday the 26th of November. I suppose in relation to that, because I'm sure members will have concerns into some of the developments around that as well. So if anyone else has any comments they want to make in relation to that.
Sorry, Shara, I didn't get those table papers today. I was in other committee this morning. So what was it, if you could just refresh?
Let me just get
A revised proposal
Revised
around the
MDTs.
MDTs.
Okay.
It's revised down in terms of funding and places, and
So we'll have more time to look into it at another.
Yeah, so we will be meeting with them.
Just
Sorry.
to say that the original proposal was to request 100 million over 5 years.
Yeah.
It's been
Revised, it's
it's down to
62.
61 or 62 million.
That's what they're proposing now.
That's the
That's what they've got.
the
Oh, that's what
revised
they've got,
proposal.
sorry.
So the director of primary care service is going to talk that through with
Okay.
committee members to help them understand what that means and what that looks like.
Okay.
On Tuesday the 26th. Yeah.
Thank you.
Okay. Members, are we happy then with the suggested actions for the remaining items on the list?
Could I ask that we look at the letter that was sent in by my colleague Peter Martin?
Yeah.
And all I really am wanting to do is that we do write to the Rainbow Project and ask for the rationale for including the gender GP service on their programme.
Well, I suppose I would be more inclined to ask Peter if he would like to write, because I think...
Well, I think he has done that, but since the committee is also charged, and the department is charged with looking after safeguarding, it's also important that the committee takes responsibility in relation to the issue as well. So it's
I understand he's referred it to the PSNI.
Well, I think that we should, as a committee responsible for safeguarding, look at why very prominent organisation here includes a service like Gender GP, or did include. It is, I'm understanding it has been removed.
Yeah.
But why? What was the rationale for including it in the first place, given the concerns around it? I'm not asking for any more than that, just an explanation of that.
I would prefer not to, because I understand that Peter took this up at committee, himself, and if he has the evidence, since it's since been removed, he said he's notified the PSNI, and then let them tell him the outcome of that investigation. But I don't think it's something that we as a committee need to be getting into.
It's really strange that we as a committee charged with safeguarding would not want to know that. I think that is strange.
Linda and then Colin.
Thanks, Chair. I suppose I don't think there's anything strange if Peter has already written the letter and there are some concerns that arise out of that letter, then we could open it up for Peter to come back to the committee in relation to that. if there are specific concerns, but I don't know why we would have to write a letter that's already been written for everybody to get the same response. I mean, I'm quite sure Peter will send us a response if there are concerns that arise out of that. I wouldn't be comfortable with it either, sure, to be honest.
Actually, yeah, and actually, it's easier. I would take just a full step back and say I'm not comfortable as a committee that we start writing to individual organisations and asking them what they're doing or not doing. I just don't think that's our role. I think our role is about statutory bodies and statutory organisations are those that are directly receiving funding or whatever that we might look at. But if we start going to organisations, because in some ways it might be that we politically don't like what they're doing, or I think for us to start stepping into that role is a bit dangerous, and we have evidence from that email that it is being pursued through statutory authorities. So I think for us to start joining into that would be unhelpful and set a dangerous precedent. But
and I also think, I'm assuming the Education Committee didn't write. So surely then that would have been, there's just been a similar few.
I have it admitted then that my concerns around the fact that the committee charged with safeguarding of young people is not willing to write on such an important subject.
If we can have it postscripted that because the PSNI are investigating it, so therefore we don't feel there's grounds as a committee to do that, but it's not that we're just choosing without evidence not to.
And the inquiries have been made by the member as well. Okay, thank you, members. Are there anything else on the correspondence list?
Just ask one question under any other business.
Sorry, we'll finish correspondence
No, we're not
first,
there yet. Sorry. Okay.
Are we happy enough then with the actions on the rest of the correspondence list? Okay, thank you. Item number 12 is the forward work programme, and as always it's in the meeting pack. It's at page 830. Just to remind members, there is an upcoming conference established from the recommendation of the Professor Jones report, Foundations for Future, which is being held on the Wednesday the 27th of November at the Crown Plaza from 9:30 a.m. to 2 p.m, and all members will have received an invite and can register on an individual basis. Our members content to note the briefings as set out in the forward work programme. And item number 13 is any other business. Just before I take you to Diana, just one I wanted to mention. We have a Zoom meeting with Unite the Union for the Registered Childminders branch, scheduled for 11 a.m. on Thursday the 21st of November. An invite will be issued by the committee office for anyone that wishes to attend that. Thank you. Diane.
Sorry, Chair, I apologise if this was raised under your comments at the start of the meeting. I did have a meeting that just overran and I just had difficulty getting here in time. So the first one is really around ascertaining what the department or how the department are viewing the cost to GP and dental practices because of the increase in national insurance service following the budget. So if we can, maybe that was raised.
No, it wasn't actually, but thank you for raising it.
I think that's really important to know, because I was at my local group surgery in Banbridge this morning at 8:30 to see the people lining up, coming in, and to see a really quite efficient way of dealing with people. But they made it very, very clear that this poses a very significant burden on them, and dental services are the same.
Yeah,
so
significant. And I actually was speaking to one of the local hospices on the same issue.
Yes,
we're talking an extra £100,000 a year.
Yep.
Okay, no, happy enough to write to the department on that one as well, Diane. Thank you for raising it.
The second thing I wonder is, have we any information from the department on the the pay offer to staff? And are we seeking any information from the department on the pay offer to staff? Because I think that's an important issue as well.
As far as I know, there's negotiations on. I know the minister met with the unions today, and has come out and said
apparently
there's an offer.
Made them an offer today, but it would be nice to understand how he hopes to take it forward.
So we can. I would imagine we'll know more about that before we're at our next committee meeting. You'd like to think, but
the press,
we can
probably.
Certainly.
I think if a minister was to tell us what negotiation offers were,
no, I don't think
it'd be the first one to do it.
But it would be important also to understand the context.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Okay, no, thank you for that, Dan. Okay, members, so thank you for your patience today, because I know it was a heavy agenda, but hopefully people find it very useful. And our next meeting is next Thursday, 21st November at 2 p.m. Meeting is now adjourned.
Committee Room 29. Sound. 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 Committee Room 29. Sound.